Creator and sustainer of all things and all people, you are the source of all wisdom and light. Enlighten our minds to receive your guidance so that you may lead us into true wisdom. May all that we say and do in the service of this county, whether as elected member or as an officer, be in accordance with your will and for the good of your people. Amen. Thank you. Evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, would everyone leave by one of the two exits at the rear of the chamber? Officers will be on hand to assist any disabled persons. Mobile phones. Good. I'm glad someone remembers this. May I ask all members who have mobile phones with them to ensure that they are switched off so they will not disturb the meeting. Agenda item number 1, Chairman's announcements. Sustainable Food Places Silver Award. I'm pleased to announce that the Good Food Leicestershire initiative has won a Sustainable Food Places Silver Award. The initiative works with cross-sector partners to tackle issues from reducing food poverty to diet-related ill health. It supports people, communities and businesses across Leicestershire to access healthy, nutritious food, and over 50 projects and organisations, from farms to restaurants, were mentioned in the nomination. We are the first authority in the Midlands to receive silver food status, which is given to organisations for having a long-term food plan in place and who make significant positive change on a range of key food issues. I'm sure members will wish to join with me in congratulating everyone involved in the initiative. Thank you very much. Report of the Returning Officer. The Chief Executive will present the report of the Returning Officer on the election of Mrs Susan Patricia Jordan to the County Council at the election held on the 21st December 2023.
Chairman, I present said report.
So, welcome Mrs Jordan. Big boots to fill, mind you. Jeff. Agenda item number 3, minutes. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 6th of December 2023, copies of which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Mr Orson, will you be okay to second?
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda in this meeting. I am assuming that all members who are members of district councils who wish to declare a registrable interest in relation to the medium-term financial strategy 2024-25 to 2027-28. I'm also advised that the following members wish to declare a non-registrable interest in the MTFS. Mr Payne, in relation to passenger transport issues as his family operate a taxi business, and Mr Phillimore, in relation to special educational needs and disabilities issues due to his wife's employment. Are there any other declarations? Mrs Hack.
Hi, just to declare I work for Advanced Housing and Support Limited that provides services to Leicestershire County Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more? No, thanks very much. Questions asked under standing orders Devon 11, 2 and 5. I have not received any questions. Wow. Agenda item number 5, to receive position statements from members of the Cabinet. The Leader. I will now invite the Leader to make his position statement. When the Leader has finished his statement, I will invite Mr Mullaney and then Mrs Hack as Leaders of the Opposition to speak first. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and I will then call you to speak. Thank you.
Yes, I think they actually can speak last, Chairman, not treading on your toes, if they want to. Okay, so I want to place on record my thanks to the local communities, their representatives, and in particular Cadent and our local resilience forum for their quick response to the recent gas outage, which included supporting vulnerable people, providing hot food and giving out heaters and blankets. Whilst I'm here, I want to give special mention to Jane Moore, who chaired the tactical coordinating group overseeing the LRF in response to this incident. I'm sure that members will agree with me that Jane did an excellent job while still carrying on one of the most onerous jobs in this council with Deborah dealing with children. And even my chief fire officer, when we were at the Fire Authority the other week congratulated her on the work they did, and I've personally gone out of my way to congratulate her. So I think it's good that we record the good work that she did, because in all honesty, it's not something that comes naturally to her in the job that she does. So congratulations to Jane. The Cabinet has asked the Local Resilience Forum to calculate the cost to the public purse so that costs can be recovered from those responsible. We've also written to Severn Trent for an explanation of the cause of the incident and the apparent delayed response to the first burst water pipe. On flooding and storms, to date, 535 residents and commercial properties in the county have been reported as having suffered internal flooding caused by Storm Henk. Again, I'm grateful to our highways team and Aussie in particular, who worked around the clock to support the emergency service in our communities to manage the road network with up to 70 roads closed. They are now continuing to clear gullies impacted by the floodwater and work through the significant backlog of drainage inquiries. I'm also pleased to report, due to the number of formal flooding investigations that are likely to be required, the budget today includes an extra £400,000 to help the council tackle flooding over the next 4 years. And as you guys know, we are the lead local flood authority, which is sometimes confusing for residents because they think they've got a flood and we'll turn up and repair it. That is not the case. And there's a particular lady in there called, I always call her Tor, who works incredibly hard. And it's a massive job they've got down there, let alone with the new stuff coming through. So hopefully the extra 400,000 will help us deal with all the inquiries, not only from residents, but also from borough and district councils. And of course, you know, with climate change, which is happening, this is only going to get worse, in my view. On devolution, since our last meeting, we've heard from Jacob Young, the devolution minister, and the government is very keen on a level 2 deal for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and would like, I think, to include it in the Chancellor's statement, which is going to be early in March. So myself, along with SPS and the leader of Rutland, are meeting the Minister on Tuesday at 9:45 a.m, and we'll be doing I'll certainly do my utmost on behalf of Leicestershire to persuade the City Mayor and Rutland to join us. And I think the government is particularly keen on us having a level 2 deal, because I think in the future, no matter who wins an election, and obviously I'm hoping we do, that ministers will tend to want to deal with these sort of authorities rather than individual little authorities scattered around all over the place. Members of Parliament, well, we've continued to work with the MPs, press our case for fair funding. I know the Liberals always make fun of me. I've been trying for the whole 12 years I've been leader. But we are making some progress, and they've been perfectly honest with me when I met the Chancellor, as you know, a while back, that there's not much chance now of us getting anything before a general election, and we might as well accept that. But they do recognise that they're going to have to do something moving forward, because it's not just us here who are badly funded. The police are badly funded, the fire's badly funded, even some of the districts are particularly badly funded. So I think it wants a root and branch review of the whole system, because it cannot be fair that somebody living in a multi-million-pound house in Westminster pays more than somebody living in a terraced house, say, in the middle of Leicester or middle of Loughborough or whatever. It just cannot be fair. So we did get an extra 5 million from the government at the very, very last minute, albeit, which isn't, again, in the best interest of us here trying to put together a medium-term financial strategy. But let's be grateful we did get it. And I want to pay particular thanks to 2 members of Parliament who actually put their head above the parapet and signed the letter which drove the government to give local authorities money. So I want to particularly place on record my thanks to Alberto Costa and to Neil O'Brien, who signed the letter, and it was published, and their names were singled out. So thanks very much to them. 5 million is useful. It's not a panacea, but it would be churlish to say it doesn't help us. Biodiversity, again, we've had briefings on this. I hope you're all aware of it. It's going to be a big issue and something we should take seriously. It requires the delivery of a 10% increase in biodiversity above the pre-development status of the site, not status quo, but actually making it better. And I think that's very, very important. It'll affect all planning applications that we deal with and districts deal with and the Minerals and Waste Authority deal with and schools and roads. So I hope most of you attended it, and it will be a big issue, and I think in the future, if you find you've not got enough information, we should put another all-member briefing on. I'll conclude there, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. And as I said at the start, Mr Mullaney and then Mrs Hack.
No,
Hmm?
they're at the end. We got it wrong. No.
Ah, that's right. Error. Correction. Mr O'Shea then first.
Mr. Payne.
Oh, no, but
No, Mr. O'Shea now, but Mr. Payne's on the list.
yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I want to put on record my thanks to the resilience team from Leicestershire County Council, from Hinckley and Bosworth and Blaby, the Leicester Search and Rescue and St John's, and anybody else I've missed for the incident in Ratby and Kirby Muxlow. I was on the ground for the full time. We had quite a lot of issues across the villages, mainly in Ratby was affected. I can't say anything more than praise for Cadent, who came out and helped people. They was absolutely first class. Severn Trent now are coming to the table and fitting boilers in and helping people across the village. We looked after the vulnerable, and I have to say that the village community was marvellous, and they're all in thanks to Cadent for what they've done. And I'd also like to say now that Severn Trent now that are working forward to actually help residents put their appliances right. Going on to Stone Inc, I would like to thank all our officers. We had a very, very busy time looking at the various issues. The flooding team were absolutely swamped, and that's not a pun, with all the work that they did. It's a small team, but they are absolutely dedicated to helping the residents of Leicestershire. I'm very pleased that we are actually putting more into the budget to help that team to move forward, because they are a dedicated team and they will do anything to help members that need support. So that's me, sir, putting on record my grateful thanks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank the Leader for his statement, and also agree with everything that Ozzy's just said. I think all areas were affected, but I know that his particular area, and the areas with the Cadent, added problem with the Cadent gas situation, those areas were particularly affected. And everything I saw, the response from the county, the boroughs and the utility companies, yeah, everyone I think did turn out and put a huge effort into resolving that. I think there are some longer term issues we need to address, particularly in relation to the flooding that he's referred to, but no doubt we'll be able to talk about that later. But I particularly just wanted to pick up on the Members of Parliament and this additional funding that's been put into the system. It's a shame it's for just 1 year, but as the leader said, something's better than nothing, and has enabled a few things to be reinstated, not least the SAVE, not least the civic community site or the recycling centre at Shepshed and Market Harborough. But I got a copy of the letter that the county APPG or parliamentary group had sent to Mr Sunak, and made quite interesting reading, because those members, as the leader said, that were prepared to stick their neck above the parapet actually did threaten in cleverly worded letter basically saying that they might have to vote against the local government settlement in February if something wasn't done. And lo and behold, within I think 3 days, something was done and this additional funding got put in. And that was signed cross-party. Majority obviously were Conservative MPs because it related to upper tier, particularly county authorities, but there are other authorities that are in a dire financial situation as well. But I guess the unanswered question is, looking at the list who signed it, is why did only 2 Leicestershire MPs sign it? Now, there might be more who added their name later. Some did, apparently, after the letter had gone. But, you know, the leader keeps saying we are critical of the fact that nothing's happened, how can it be the case after everything he's done, this council's done, previous spokespersons, leaders on finance, officers have done in this, how can it be that only 2 out of 6, or is it 7, I'm not sure, the situation in North West, managed to sign this letter? They were all prepared to turn up and have their photo taken recently in 11 Downing Street. The leader went down, turn up there, be photographed, having their photo taken. Oh, yes, yes, we fully support it. When it comes to signing a letter to say the situation is really serious, Mr. Sunak, and something needs to be done, they are nowhere to be seen. So we do have to ask the question how serious their commitment is to the fair funding campaign. Yes, 2 MPs did, and I would welcome, obviously we would all welcome that. But the ones that didn't, is the leader planning to take any further correspondence, any further? Clearly they need to be educated a bit more, Mr. Chairman, on how difficult and how serious our financial situation in Leicestershire is. I do know he wrote to them 2 years ago, setting out in very clear detail what the consequences would be if something wasn't done. He referred to highway works in that. He referred to children's services and a range of other services, the sort of cuts that would have to be made. So the evidence is there. Nobody can accuse this council or that side of the chamber of not telling the MPs how serious the situation is, but they couldn't sign the letter. I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galton. Mr. Meyer.
Cheers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo what Ozzy said about what happened with Storm Henk, less so the Cadent one, but I've followed the Twitter feed and the Leicestershire press releases as well, and it seems it was a sterling job there, done by all, actually, so well done on that one, Ozzy. Just on the flooding, actually, the first week or the first few days of January were an absolute nightmare with Storm Henk. I'm waking up at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, to residents telling you that the house was flooded, and you're thinking, hold on, I just saw the brook 2 foot under, but the canal breached, and it was an absolute nightmare. And in the moment, and Ozzy could probably relate to that, in the moment when you're in there, all you're looking for is help and an assistant for not just yourself, but for the residents around you. And this is where I think I want to thank Leicestershire County Council, Charlton Borough Council as well, but here Leicestershire County Council, because I reached out to Anne Carruthers, and Anne was absolutely sterling. She made sure the officers were there for the road closures, but she also made sure that after the event, when the drains needed to be cleared and sorted out, and Leicestershire County Council needed to be visible for the residents, they were there. Yes, you'll always get people who think that we've turned up after the event, but who could have thought the canal's never breached? I've lived there 47 years of my life, and it's never breached. So, you know, it's hopefully one of those occasions where it's a once in a lifetime event. But yeah, it was there, and I just wanted to thank the response that we received, but also the response afterwards as well. So sometimes the immediate response is there and you think it's brilliant, but the response afterwards as well. So when people have seen blocked drains, they tweet you now, or they message you, or they Facebook message you. So you get responses immediately now. Before we used to do a ward walk to find out which drains or gullies were blocked, or which part of the road wasn't working correctly, or where there was an accident. Now people actually just send you a picture of it, and then you can just report it, and it just takes a couple of days, and those drains and those gullies are unblocked. Ongoing maintenance, that's a different issue. That's a long-term thing. We can all discuss on that, but the response that we've had from the officers, it's been really good. And then the response that's happened in Ratby from the same group of people, potentially, shows how well the County Council is developing and working in that respect. And Nick's right, the leader's right, because this global warming, these storms and weather events and weather patterns are probably going to keep happening. And this is probably, we don't want to do it, but we probably need to be specialists in reacting to this kind of thing if preventative measures can't be put in place because the funding isn't there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. Mr. Bray.
Yes, Chairman, if you'll indulge me briefly, I just, standing up with my other hat on as leader of the district, I did want to put my thanks on record as well to officers here for the sterling work that was done in Ratby. Did an absolutely fantastic job, as did the district council officers, and as Mr. O'Shea said, it was good teamwork, and well done to all involved.
Oops, thank you very much. Mr. Payne.
Many thanks, Chairman. I just want to speak to the biodiversity net gain and thank the leader for including what he says himself is an exceedingly important function of this council. Many members, about 22 to 24, turned up to the all-member briefing on the 6th of February. I'm grateful for that, and I hope you got something out of it. The leader was keen to impress that if further training is needed, it should be forthcoming. Well, I just want to make the point that there is a training session on the 29th of February, firstly for all planning officers, district and borough councils, but indeed there's going to be a further members training session, which is extended to district councillors and I believe town and parish councillors as well. So please keep that in your diary if you're interested about biodiversity net gain. The reason it's so important, at least in my view, is that when people ask us what do the county council do, fundamentally we adult social care, children and families, environment and transport. We have some statutory functions like children and families, but this too will become a statutory function. It means in planning terms, and as the leader's already identified, where we have development at the moment and then it's expected that there might be a little bit of green and pleasant lawns forthcoming, it will be compelled through planning applications to have an increase in biodiversity of at least 10% for every application. There are some exceptions in law, but that is now going to be a statutory requirement and one that I understand comes before, say, schools or roads or any other amenity. So we wait to see how that pans out in terms of viability in planning terms, and I wish all the dual hatters here that sit on planning committees, etc., the best of luck in navigating that. But we, of course, as Leicestershire County Council, have a development and control function too. So this will apply to us in two ways, not only in a decision-making and regulatory responsibility, but our officers, which we've geared up, and we've got an excellent new officer, someone called Vanessa Evans, who I was hugely impressed with at the meeting, an ecology specialist who is looking after the ecology team that will do a lot of the number crunching and the data work that will be supplied to the borough and district councils. Just one further thing to say, the work that they do will be treated as a statutory consultee. So although this will be a statutory responsibility in planning terms, the work and the information that we provide to the planning departments at the various borough and district councils will be on a like a statutory consultee basis. But nonetheless, I'm rather proud that it's I'll say a Conservative government that legislated to enshrine these kind of targets in legislation, because one thing we all want to do is make sure that our natural environment is protected. And indeed, the County Council has a corporate priority in this respect, which is to make sure that the nature and local environment are valued, protected and enhanced. And hopefully this will help us achieve that aim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Mrs. Radford.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try not to knock my name off. Thank you, the leader, for your statement. Regarding the flooding, my brother is a part of the 4x4 team, and he said how well organised everything was. Going back to the BNG, I understand that new applications, that we can go back 5 years to check whether or not they've cleared the land before they start putting in a planning application. And I think that's brilliant, because quite often applicants will be clearing the land and then putting in an application saying there's nothing there. But I understand we can go back and check, and I didn't know how, but then I've been told you do all these Zoom things and whatever, and you can see what was there. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. We can't save what they've taken down on current planning applications. But can I just ask Councillor Blaine, town councils, we've asked for a couple of our town councillors to go on this training, and we've been informed that they can't go. So, and we've got an ecology officer who wanted to go. So I'd like you to clarify that for me, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Radford. Mr. Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you. On the same subject, I do back up what Christine has just said. This is important, and it's long overdue. What we have, of course, in the south of the county is massive warehouse development, where huge swathes of countryside have gone under tarmac or concrete and very little else. And I find it hard to believe, having attended this seminar, that in fact there is a current responsibility for a like-for-like replacement of biodiversity. Because when you look at Magna Park, and when you look at the rail freight depot, which we're threatened with, and you look at all the warehousing we have strung along the A5, I find it hard to believe that there's any biodiversity there at all. Now, if in future we're going to see an additional 10%, not only a like-for-like replacement, but we're going to see an additional 10%, I do wish Vanessa and her team well on this, but I find it hard to believe where this land is coming from, which is going to give us all of this. If we've built on it, and the rest is under agriculture, how can you invent land to actually put diversity onto, or anything else? And if the answer is, well, it won't be near to the site, it's going to be 10 miles, 20 miles away on a special site, that's fine, but it doesn't do much for the areas that are already affected by this. There are so many unanswered questions, and I think we just would like to have more information. We want to see it work, and it's long overdue, but how on earth is it going to work? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Mrs. Newton.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, Chair. I just wanted to mention the flooding that we had in Halden. Like others, it was very badly affected. Halden village lies very low, right there on the Severn Trent, and some houses were flooded badly. I went down to see them. One was so bad you couldn't even walk through the floor of her house. But what I would like to do, I would like to take this opportunity to thank those county officers who kept in regular touch with me about it. Also our partner agencies, Severn Trent kept in touch, as did the Fire Authority, and I think it was an example of good communications with some of us at a very difficult time for our constituents. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Newton. Mr. King.
Thank you, Chair. Thank the leader for his report, and also like to thank the county teams that were involved in the clean-up work on the flooding in Market Harbour West and Foxton, which includes Foxton and also Lubenham, which is quite often affected by flooding issues. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful that the Cabinet has listened to the public consultation response about the waste sites, particularly Market Harbour, and grateful for the amended proposal that's been put forward in the budget. But what I wanted to just comment particularly about was about the proposed meeting about the devolution deal. And as colleagues will know, I have been rather critical of the approach of the city mayor, and I think it's a bit rich of the opposition members on this council to talk about funding. This funding was available if we had got a Devo level 3 deal put together, but unfortunately the roadblock of the city mayor and the Rutland Council have meant that that's not happened. And so whilst Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire are ploughing ahead, and they've got an election in a few weeks, a couple of months for the new combined authority mayor, we haven't got that, and we aren't getting the money. And that's very, very disappointing to me, not only as a member of this authority, but also as a local resident of Leicestershire, that infrastructure growth in Leicestershire is being constrained by the narrow interests of the city and others to stop that happening. And it's whilst Devo level 2 is welcome, it is nothing. It's not going to really address the infrastructure issues that a level 3 deal would have done if we'd been able to achieve that. So we're going to be Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland by ourselves in a level 2, and we're going to miss out, I think, unless that's sorted out by whoever the next government is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. I've had nobody else put their hand up to speak, so I'll ask Mrs. Hack now.
Thank you, Chair. I think the response on the Ratby and Kirby Muxloe outage in terms of the officers here definitely shows Leicestershire County Council in its best light. The way in which the officers pull together for the community, And actually, it was a real cross-authority response, and colleagues from Blaby District Council and private gyms and everybody came together to make sure that those residents were given the food, the washing facilities to ensure that they weren't disadvantaged as much by the gas outage that could have impacted them. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I listened to the Cabinet conversation on this, is the way within which Severn Trent initially was so slow to respond. And I think obviously encouraged that is now picked up, and that's been be a really important post outage response to that. In terms of flooding, so many members across this chamber have talked about the way within which those flooding have affected each division. I think, you know, in terms of a flood event, it was a never event. It's something that it was upon that we haven't seen before, and certainly there are residents in my community that have lived in their homes for 30, 40 years, have never had flooding before. And sadly, one of those homes is going to be knocked down and rebuilt. The flooding was such a problem for them. And I think that we just have to make sure that all of those residents are supported long term, because the impact of this isn't just those few days in the beginning of January. This now is months and months of putting their lives back together. And I think that we've all got a responsibility to help them where we can. And I'm really grateful to the way in which the council and others have responded to that. In terms of devolution, I'm glad we're moving forward. Level 2 deal is a deal, and hopefully the meeting next week will get us an outcome. I think Councillor Galton raised the very point, is only 2 of our MPs signed. To, you know, the impact that of Leicestershire's funding in terms of local government. But actually, you know, Leicestershire is just one authority that is struggling with their funding. Every local authority in the country is seeing real challenges, and it's local government that needs support. And the fact only 2 of our MPs put their name to that letter, I think that's super disappointing. And on the biodiversity net gain, what a huge step forward. And Councillor Payne, thank you for going into some detail. I thought that was really useful. So thank you for that. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this will move forward, how that will police. What's the beginning bionet diversity? What's the gain? How will they deliver that? And I think that's going to be really interesting as we move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Tack. Mr. Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I also will join in the appreciation for those who helped in the Ratby and Kirkby Muxloe gas outage situation, both the officers at the county, Jane and all the other officers that were involved, and as Stuart and Ozzy and others have said, also the Hinkley and Bosworth officers, many of whom put a huge amount of time and effort into supporting residents in Ratby. And I agree that it's disappointing questions to answer from Severn Trent regarding the situation, particularly as, you know, people are being hit with increasing water bills at the moment from them. It's particularly disappointing if they haven't been up to standard on this issue. In terms of flooding, I agree there's a problem with it in many places in the county, including in a number of Hinkley and Bosworth, who experienced flooding problems in the recent flooding, and it's clear that we do need a big increase in support in the resources available to deal with this issue, and obviously we will be discussing that later on in the agenda. Devolution. Level 2 is something, so, you know, we should be glad that we're getting something, but it is clearly very limited compared to what would be available on level 3, and when we look at the fact that obviously fair funding is still not being delivered, it's disappointing that we're not getting access to that funding that Leicestershire really needs. In terms of the dealings with the MPs, again, as Nick himself mentioned, it isn't actually just the fact that Leicestershire is the worst funded county in the country that's a problem, but also when you look at the districts and boroughs, they're amongst some of the worst funded councils in the country. When you look at the police service, the fire service, they all report being well below average in terms of funding, and also similar situations with education and the NHS. So it is disappointing that when our area is really being let down in terms of funding, that more of our MPs weren't kicking up a fuss by signing the letter, and it is disappointing that they didn't all put their names to it, particularly given they must be aware that the county has made this such a leading campaign to try and get fair funding for Leicestershire. And in terms of the biodiversity situation, I also add my support to that, and agree that it's good that it's being taken notice of. It's a key thing that needs taking into account in planning decisions, so at least it's being taken into account. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mullany. Mr. Rushton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just in order, not in any particular order. David, Bill, if you don't understand biodiversity again, we have done a training session, and there's a couple more coming up for those of you who didn't quite grasp it.
Nick, I fully understand it. I just don't see how you're going to invent land to put diversity on.
Well, maybe the next training session will help you, David. So thank you.
I don't think it's me that requires help, Nick, on this. I understand the problem.
I just thought you didn't understand what biodiversity net gain was, David, as you're approaching your latter years. Christine, if you want a response from Blake is precluded from answering here. If you write to him, he'll tell you whether or not your parish council can attend or not. Phil, you're right, really. Level three.
Chairman, I do resent that remark,
just a minute,
which
just a
seems
minute.
to be rather ageist. And I thought there are so many things we're not allowed to say anymore, and I think that does come under that category. I'm quite happy to debate any issue you like with Nick or anybody else, despite being here quite a few years.
I'd assumed he was referring to me, actually, not you.
No, it's not, I'm not ageist, Dave. As you know, Biden's 2 years older than you, and he's still going for another term. So you're actually one of the young ones in politics. So, Phil, you're dead right. Level 3 would have been better. We would have to be very careful if we joined Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire and all that lot now, because they'd just pinch our money. That's all they want from us, and we'd be outvoted. And also, level 2 is as good as we're likely to get. So we've not only got City Mayor not wanting to go for level 3, the new Liberal leader of Rutland has also said she's not interested in a level 3. So in the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of trying to get us somewhere, because don't forget originally when we went for the county deal with an elected mayor, we were in the vanguard of this issue. Now we're just in with the pack. So in the spirit of getting something for Leicestershire, I'm willing to move forward and work on a deal with City Mayor and the leader of Rutland, which is what we've been told we've got to work with, to try and get us to a level 2 deal. Finally, Simon, the reason that we only had 2 members of Parliament sign is if you're on the so-called payroll, if they sign, and I can't ask Bridgen because he's gone off to some weird party, but if members of Parliament who are on the so-called payroll, if they sign, they have to resign from their position. So I had long chats with Ed and others who are on the so-called payroll, wholly supportive, explained to me why they couldn't sign. And in the spirit of having good relationships with the members of Parliament, Dr. Luke, who couldn't sign because he's on the payroll, a PPS or whatever, he's arranged a meeting for me coming up specifically to discuss funding with Simon Hall, where all the members of Parliament are again going to attend. So I think getting 2, bearing in mind, we can't have Bridgen sign because he's gone elsewhere, 2 out of the ones that could sign, and that's why I've specifically mentioned Alberto and Neil, because Neil had only just stood down from being a minister, so it was a bit of a big jump for him, but they both signed it. Now getting 2 out of the 6 was a lot higher percentage than you got in a lot of other counties. And I thank them for doing it. I think that answers all the questions I've particularly got down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rushton. Agenda item 7, which is now considering reports of the Cabinet Scrutiny Commission, Scrutiny Committees and other bodies. This time, report of the Cabinet, medium-term financial strategy, 2024-25 to 2027-28, and Mr. Brecken to move.
Thank you, Chairman. An overview, first of all. This is the Council's toughest ever budget, with the need to use reserves to balance 24-25, a significant gap of over 30 million in 25-26 and over 80 million by 27-28. The gap of 25-26 is of concern, as this is an unusual position for Leicestershire County Council to be in. It really does demonstrate the difficult position that local government is in. It is increasingly difficult for councils to set a balanced budget, but as we have been clear on throughout the budget process, we are not in crisis territory yet, and we are not in the realms of needing to issue a Section 114. The late announcement of further social care funding with £5 million for this county council was appreciated, and again we thank our Leicestershire MPs for their support in securing this. It has helped reduce the shortfall, but does little to improve the overall MTFS position. The funding gap is driven primarily by increased demand for social care services, both in adults and children's, as well as the inflationary pressures and impact on the national living wage. The key figures here are £129 million service growth in the MTFS, mainly in social care, and £100 million provision for cost inflation. Looking ahead to 25-26 and beyond, uncertainty will hamper the ability to deliver a sustainable financial plan. And whenever the general election is called, and with a new spending review due, it will make 25-26 a very difficult budget-setting year. The Chancellor's autumn statement referred to a 3.4% real-term reduction in spending for unprotected government departments, and local government is unprotected. Low funding continues to be an issue, and we'll continue to keep this on the government's agenda. The high needs deficit will be a new risk and a key risk for future sustainability. The deficit is over £100 million by the end of the MTFS, despite identified ways of reducing the forecast growth. The statutory override we have in place is due to end in March 2026, so we need urgent clarity from government on how this will be dealt with. So the main takeaways from my overview is that the challenging position, coupled with uncertainty, will require urgent action, and the need to look at delivering services differently and demand management will be crucial. On resources, the government funding for 24-25 is largely as expected, with the exception of a larger cut in the services grant of over 80%, from £2.5 million down to £400,000, and the additional social care grant of £5 million. The settlement again was for 1 year only, so there is significant uncertainty for 25-26 onward. The level of council tax increase is a critical decision, and the MTFS assumes that the maximum increase is applied to 24-25 and also 25-26. With a 3% increase for core services and a 2% increase in adult social care precept. This will generate £18 million more per annum for frontline services. The 4.9% increase in 24-25 adds £1.46 to the council tax bill of a Band D household per week, which is approximately £76 per year. There is uncertainty over future council tax increases, as it will be dependent on the government policy in relation to referendum limits and the continuation of the adult social care precept. The additional council tax income is vital, as cost and demand pressures are expected to continue through the MTFS and will outstrip increases in other income, especially given the real-term reductions in government funding expected as per the Chancellor's autumn statement. Business rates is another area of risk for us, as if there is a reset of growth and pools do not continue, this will mean the loss of £10 million worth of growth plus any share of pool growth, which has been partly built into the current MTFS. At this time, government forecasts for public sector spend do not indicate any increase in grant funding, leaving the problem to be solved locally. On growth, £129 million worth of growth plus £100 million for inflation. The main driver is growth in adult in social care. Across the MTFS, we've included £43 million in children's, both to cover demand and complexity of need and placement costs. We've included £46 million in adults, the demographics and higher costs driven by the increased national living wage. We've added £10 million for SEND and social care transport. And of course, the national living wage increase costs us £20 million in 24-25 alone. Demand management savings have been allocated to reduce this growth, but we will need to go further to ensure the MTFS gap can be managed. On savings of over £80 million have been identified to mitigate the additional costs. These include £40 million from council services and £41 million to reduce the deficit on the high needs budget. We still have large funding gaps despite these savings, and we are not balanced in any year. With a gap between income and expenditure of £83 million by 27-28, this does mean further savings will be required. Remember, this gap is assuming council tax increases. so more difficult decisions will need to be made. Realistically, a gap of this size cannot be closed by further efficiency savings alone, although they will undoubtedly play an important part. I must emphasise that demand management is key, and we have to reduce social care demand to ensure council's future sustainability. Redesigning of services will need to see a focus on promoting independence, use of digital technology, more prevention work, and improving commissioning strategies to reduce placement cost. With the capping of council tax increases expected to continue, we will need to look at what services we provide and how. Our council services are already low and cost efficient, and we know from external benchmarking, so opportunities for savings are harder to find. Cross-cutting initiatives will also be key by ensuring support services are efficient and that they make the most of automation and that they can avoid any duplication between our services. On capital, the capital programme is 447 million over the MTFS period, of which 145 million is in this next current year. This investment in priority areas such as roads, infrastructure and new school places includes 91 million for children and family services for schools and social care accommodation, 22 million for adults and communities, which includes 19 million pounds related to the Disabilities Facilities Grant programme and schemes for the Social Care Investment Plan. Environment and Transport has 207 million allocated to it, includes major schemes such as the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road North East, Zoch Bridge replacement and asset replacement programmes. Corporate resources, £10 million to invest in IT, transformation, property and environmental projects. The corporate programme Investing in Leicestershire programme, £62 million, where schemes can be identified that support the local economy and provide a good financial return. And we have additional funding for highways maintenance has been announced, including 139 million for the next 11 years under the Network North Works, due to reallocating the HS2 funding. However, only the first 2 years has been confirmed, which is 2.2 million for each of the next 2 years, and this is included in the programme. £9 million of forward funding has been included in the programme to allow investment in infrastructure at an appropriate time, ahead of developer contributions being received. This is a risk and we'll need to carefully manage this. The capital programme is funded by a combination of grants, capital receipts and developer contributions. However, there's a funding gap of 90 million for which we'll need to cover through internal borrowing where possible, but may need to take out new external borrowing at some point. It is noted the funding gap is lower than the previous MTFS of 122 million, largely due to the removal of the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road South. This shows this council can and will make difficult decisions when needed to ensure our financial sustainability is not at risk. On reserves and resilience, our assumptions are reasonable and realistic, and our Section 151 officer has given assurance on budget proposals. It's risk assessed and appropriate contingencies and reserves are included. There are risks to be managed, particularly demand and future increased costs, as well as significant uncertainty over government funding and policy. Given the increased risk and the funding gap, it's more important that Council holds a reasonable level of reserves. The Council's general fund balance will stand at 21 million at the end of this year, which is 3.7% of the net budget, and lower than the ideal recommended of 4 to 7%. Therefore, the MTFS does include provision to increase this to 24 million by the end of the period, which is prudent. Earmarked reserves are held for specific reasons to cover specific risks or hold ring-fenced grant funding to be spent in the future. Our SIP for Resilience Index shows a slightly increased risk profile, largely due to the levels of unallocated reserves being lower and the future risk of a business rates reset. We still compare favourably, however, against other local authorities. Finally, on the public consultation, we received 450 responses and gives us a flavour of public opinion. Roughly half supported our proposed council tax increase, and the majority was supportive of the approach taken on growth and savings. It is worth noting, and it's good to see, there's continued support and indeed strong support for the council continuing with its fair funding campaign. With this in mind, our continued promise to fight alongside our county MPs for fair funding, as the leader mentioned in his statement, we have accepted the opportunity to meet with Simon Hoare, the Minister for Local Government, to continue to press forward our case. It is noteworthy that our police, fire and public health authorities are also the lowest funded in England, all based on age formulas that have to change to give Leicestershire and its residents the funding it deserves. As an administration, we have provided clear, decisive and economic leadership and are making the most of what we have. We maximise every penny and ensure it is spent the most effective way and spending it where it matters. Chairman, I commend the budget to this chamber and I'm happy to propose the recommendations on the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Beckham. Mr. Shepherd, you have the right to the second.
Thank you, Chairman. I second the motion. Lee has given us a comprehensive and thorough account of where we are and what faces us. There was no sort of hyperbole in that, nothing designed to make people's blood run cold and shivers down the spine. It's the facts of where we are. And first of all, I commend that on that basis for the support of you all. Yes, there is some needs to be welcomed. The £5 million need to take that much less from our reserves, but we are still drawing on our reserves. We've always in the past wanted to avoid that. It's just a measure of where we are that we are needing to use reserves this time to balance the budget. As Leah said, the big takeaways from that, the big things for us all to bear in mind are, we are an efficient council. We deliver the best we can with the money that we have, but we're going to have to face up to demand management and redesigning services and need to do those things urgently. So therefore, I say to opposition groups, please set aside gesture politics. Set aside your desire for stuff for the leaflets and no sound bites, and just acknowledge what this council, all of us, has achieved. Let's recognise the hard work and the skill of our officers in helping us to do that. Let's recognise the quality of what we do. Let's not nitpick and grasp at shadows. Let's understand the substance of the problem. Urgent action, difficult decisions, and I therefore am very pleased, Chairman, to commend this difficult budget to you, the one that's needed in these circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Mr. Rushton.
Chairman, I don't propose to talk about individual services, just the principles on myself as leader of this administration and on our principles of how we govern. And we do this despite being the lowest funded county in the whole country, and that's recognised by everyone. We will not ever go bankrupt. We will not be serving a 114 notice to reassure members of the public, and more than that, members of our staff who work here. Some authorities threaten it just to get difficult budgets through councils or to kowtow officers, but we will not ever be in that position. A, because it is bad. We don't want to do it. We're a proud county. And also because bringing in commissioners serves no one, serves nothing. All they do is tell you what to do, line stuff up and make you sell it. So we need to reassure you and members of the public that we will not go bankrupt. We will make difficult decisions, and they will be politically difficult. This budget is not easy for any of us on this side. It has been angst-ridden that we can't do anything that a lot of our residents want because we are that short of money. But we can promise our residents we are open and honest, and we do not seek to hide anything from them ever. We do listen. So when we consulted about the household waste recycling sites, and we got thousands of people not wanting them to be closed or altered at all, we listened and we have reacted. So we are open, honest, we listen and react. In our original manifesto 3 years ago, we promised to protect the vulnerable. And I think despite you being the opposition, you can recognise that we have stuck to that manifesto commitment. And it is increasingly hard to honour that commitment with the lack of money that we've got. We are super efficient, second or third most efficient in the country, but we cannot just rest on our laurels of the efficiency that we've done. We have got to innovate, as Lee said, as Richard said. We've got to innovate, and we have got to make further savings. So it will continue to be tough. But again, we can promise the residents of Leicestershire, as Richard said just before me, that we will do the best for the residents of Leicestershire with the money we've got. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rushton. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just really want to mention the funding of Leicestershire as a whole. It's been touched on earlier, but I chair the Police and Crime Panel for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and at our recent budget meeting for the police force and the OPCC, it was identified that they are underfunded. Our schools are underfunded, we are underfunded, and this creates a perfect storm within Leicestershire. So we need policy change, we need changes to the duties we are statutorily responsible for to fit the budget envelope we operate in. Local government cannot continue as we are. We will become a social care provider if we carry on the road we are on. We need to look to the future and see the direction of travel, to see a slimmed down local government model. What that model looks like will be in the hands of the next government. My Department of Children and Families is being hit hard with growth. We need to deliver our services and support differently. We're working hard on this, but I'm pushing back on cutting targeted early help for families, as this would just increase the costs further down the road at the crisis point. Not only would this increase costs for the council, but it's also not right for families and children. We need policy change, and the new government needs to address this with great urgencies. Our MP has fought hard for us to get us a meeting with the Chancellor to present our case. It was accepted that we're underfunded, but it is a mammoth task to look at local government funding. There will always be winners and losers, but we need to make this happen. I know our two prospective parliamentary candidates, who are also senior county councillors here, are fully aware of the pressures we face and are heading into this mammoth task with gusto. We can present a balanced budget for next year, but the following years ahead will be tough. I know we will get through this and continue to provide excellent services for our residents, but maybe in a slightly different way. If nothing else, we are stable, strong, innovative administration, and due to our excellent officers, we have been preparing for tough times ahead for several years. On to my second area that I look after, which is trading services. So this is one of the many public services that have been hit by budgetary pressures. Despite councils having a statutory duty to operate a trading standard service, many departments have been pared back to the point of being barely operational. Trading standards aren't protected in budget allocations in the same way that social care is, which in our council equates to about 80% of our budget. Trading standards have a stake in food safety, product safety, animal welfare, underage sales, fair trading, scams, illicit tobacco, automotive safety, doorstep crime, illegal money lending, and the list goes on and on and on. The reality is that the front line of trading services enforcement are dedicated, diligent and highly professional people tackling life-threatening hazards, investigating complex fraud cases and going after serious organised criminal networks. They're passionate about protecting consumers. Their actions prevent us all from being exploited, achieve justice for victims of crime, and to put it bluntly, save lives. They help ensure local communities are protected from this invisible threat. New products and increasingly complex global supply chains have also created new avenues for consumer harm and new responsibility for trade examiners. For example, devices such as electric bikes and scooters purchased online from companies based thousands of miles away have caused horrific house fires and deaths in the UK. Simply put, local authority trading standard services are being forced to do more with less, and at some point something has to give. I am proud that this council ensures that trading standards are funded with the money they need, but they could do so much more with more funding. We have included growth for trading standards within this MTFS, and I continue to fight for those services. Trading standards services can be counted in human lives and livelihoods, not just in pounds and pence. I will be supporting these recommendations on the order paper.
Thanks, Mr Taylor. Mr Bill.
Chairman, I suppose I have a feeling of anger, really, when we come to this budget, because every year the situation seems to be getting worse. We've heard from our friends across here that we're bottom of the heap when it comes to local government services. The funding of local government services, the funding of fire, the funding of the police, the funding of health, and the funding of education. I've been asking for the figures, actually, and the figures bear out. I shan't go through them this afternoon, but the figures bear out that the East Midlands comes off worse across the whole country and of the East Midlands, Leicestershire comes off worst across the whole region. And we have to ask ourselves why this is. Why are we being left out? The West Midlands has pressed ahead with its elected mayor and is getting something like twice the funding that we're getting over here. And that shows in the investment that's going in across the whole of that area. You drive along the A46 route across the East Midlands, and it's much the same as it's been for years. You hit Warwickshire, and you're into tremendous flyovers and fly-unders, and it's all coming together, and we're being left behind. And we look what's happening across here in the East Midlands. Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire have come together, and they're going to pull ahead as well. So even looking at the figures that we have in front of us, there's no guarantee whatsoever that the situation is going to improve. None whatsoever. And why is this? We've been hearing for years that you've been talking to your MPs. The MPs understand the situation, and they've been talking to ministers, and ministers understand that we're in this dire straits, and it's all going to be sorted out. Year after year after year, we've been told it's all going to improve. And yet what happens? We can see what's happening. The West Midlands is going to pull further ahead of us. Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire are going to pull further ahead of us. It's not going to do them much good because Birmingham's going down the pan anyway, and so is Nottingham. But nevertheless, they're getting the funding. We are getting zilch, effectively. And is it because we have ineffective MPs? Is it because we have an ineffective government? I'm angry because it was not always like this. Leicestershire used to be at the forefront of local government. People used to come from across the country and indeed from across the world to see what we were achieving here in education, for example. I'm not exaggerating. Leicestershire was held up as the example of how to do it. Now, I doubt whether anybody will ever come here again to see how we're doing it unless there is a sea change of attitude and a sea change, and it has to come from the top. We can't do it ourselves. The government has to wake up to the fact that we are sick and tired of finding ourselves in a relegation place year after year after year. It has to change, and our MPs have to wake up to the challenge we face. We had a meeting in London yesterday when we talked about the infrastructure of the East Midlands, and not one of our Leicestershire MPs spoke at that event. If we're prepared to go to London to put the case for improved infrastructure, I would have thought the MPs could have spoken up and said, yes, we agree. But having a bunch of silent MPs is doing us no good, and it has to change. Something has to change. We have got to start climbing up that table again and not just be facing relegation year after year. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Bill. Mrs. Radford.
Thank you, Chairman. My department that I look after is Adult and Communities. I've been working hard to keep in budget, and I am grateful for the extra 2% that we've got. And it's an ever-growing service. As the leader has already said, that we are all getting older. And I've got to hold my hand up and say I'm one of them. But I cannot not mention and thank everybody for all the work they've done, is to keep Shepshed Refuge Recycling Centre tip open. That's the staff and Lee and Blake and everybody like that, the 2 days. I mean, and all the residents that completed the consultation, I'm very grateful because now I'm not getting all the agri emails. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first like to thank Declan, Simone and Lee and all colleagues for producing a balanced budget. It has been difficult. So another year over, another just beginning. what have the Conservatives done from government and in Leicestershire. 14 years ago, we were promised a plan for social care, the old and disabled. Turns out there's still no plan. We just get an increase of 2% tax every year instead. We were promised better education for children with health and disability needs. Turns out it's a broken system at the mercy of consultants with a huge and growing deficit, which we'll need to repay currently by 2026. Still no plan. Our waste and recycling gave a good report this year, promising processing of food waste, which we're looking forward to, and preparing for emissions trading. And well done to Shepshed for saving their local tip, which we'll all pay for, by the way. So, on transport, we still have no up-to-date local transport plan. LTP4 seems to have disappeared. Most other authorities are well into that. But that was a key action on the local, on the net zero plan, wasn't it? The one that we all, or you all, voted for a little bit more than a year ago. And so that brings me finally to the point of those 163, believe it or not, 163 actions, almost none of them being smart, measurable. And I asked myself, why in this budget are we being asked to add another 5 years to the targets? Why is it in the budget? Well, it's in the budget because if you vote for the budget, you're also voting to put 5 more years on all the targets. So someone's not very confident of that. And why not? Well, because if you look at all those actions that we were given, almost none of them were calibrated by 2035 or 2045. None of them. They were just thrown in and you all voted for them. So the real question will come when the outcome of these new targets comes to Cabinet, and we've asked in scrutiny to have a good look at them. And there are things that you could do. You could make what is, frankly, a very top-heavy set of actions which are fairly meaningless, many of them, and introduce some actions, a few actions, limited and answerable. At the moment, they're not. You could devolve the whole thing to the departments. You could say, well, give us such and such as a contribution to net zero and climate change. We're talking about flooding a lot. So there are things that the Cabinet could do to make a better plan at less cost. And this is actually partly about the cost, which came out in the scrutiny committee as well, about £500,000 a year apparently going into a rather nebulous climate change policy. So the jury's out, and we'll have to see what emerges from that. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Cheers, Mr. Chairman. I echo what Max says, and Mr. Will to an extent. The West Midlands is pulling away when you look at the East Midlands, but hopefully we'll have a change of MPs coming forward, and the ones that are going to be MPs. I'm not looking at anybody in particular, but we'll be more sympathetic and fight our cause a bit more valiantly. We have before us another tough budget on in seemingly endless Tory austerity. Remember that word? The narrative of which as we have no money, the government supposedly isn't giving us our fair share, so we have to make do. Well, that's the reality of it, so we have to. Not only are we on this side sick of this narrative, I feel the public is too. When I was speaking to residents after the flooding, they didn't want to hear that the county council didn't come out because of budget cuts to do the drains. They didn't care about Charnborough Council not having the officers all the time available to help them when they were in their time of need. They're just thinking that the council had let them down, and they were sick to death of me telling them, actually, we haven't got the money for this, and we haven't got the money for that, and we haven't got the money for the other. So I think the public is at the end of their tether as well on it. And it truly feels like, you know, we need some change, and we need to change the direction in this country, and I think it's not too far away. Our residents must think we are fleecing them, though, especially when they see that we're putting up council tax again by an inflation-busting 5%. The cost of living might have moved away from the headlines temporarily, but is still being keenly felt. Hard-pressed residents are being asked again to put hands in their pockets to make up for Conservative government failure to fund local government properly. Detailed in this report is an astonishing figure. Since 2015, the amount of council tax collected from residents has gone up by 70%. That's a whopping £164 million extra being paid by the residents of Leicestershire. Give it another couple of years and the administration will have doubled the take. In this budget alone, council taxpayers are being asked to pay £23.6 million more just in that 1 year. And what extra are they getting for their money? Little, I would hazard. However, pointing this out, I need to be balanced. The council spends over £1 billion, which is a huge amount of money. So there's choices to be made there. And I have every sympathy now with Nick and Lee, having gone through this exercise at a different authority. And I know the decisions are tough, and some of the times you have to make those tough decisions of what to keep in and what to leave out. But ultimately, the officers are there to help us, and the decisions are political. Okay. Most of which is spent making the lives. So most of the £1 billion that we spend is making the lives of our residents better. And the leader pointed out that they made the manifesto promise of looking after those that are most vulnerable in Leicestershire, which I think to a large extent they did. But then we had that debacle with the Falcon Centre and the homelessness provision. And that kind of statement didn't then sit nicely with me, so I thought I wanted to point that out. I know we're looking at different provisions for that, but when you stand up and you say that you're looking after the most vulnerable, but 2 cabinet meetings ago you actually took away £300,000 from such a provision, I don't think it's best to mention it in full council. A quick non-scientific glance at the budget, I'd say, was probably about 70, but Councillor Taylor confirmed 80% of our budget goes to looking after social care, be it elderly or youngsters. So we must know that everything else has to go into that other 20%. And that's tough to square that circle, as they say. And what the council does, it does very well. And I just wanted to point a few examples. I sit on the Adult and Social Care Committee, so I will speak through what I see on that committee and the reports that come through. I can only talk on that committee I serve in. Community libraries, that's an example of how we've reshaped how we deliver the library provisions. And I'll be the first one to put my hands up. I thought they were going to fail. You know, when they were first brought up in that committee, I thought, that's it, you know, we're going to be 5 or 6 years down the road, and a lot of them would have collapsed. But actually, a lot of them are thriving. And that's thanks to the hard work of our officers to make them a success, but also our residents who have volunteered and taken up the slack when the county council has withdrawn a little bit. Remember Help to Live at Home? Cost us £1 million. But what a turnaround it's been for the target operating model. Yes, we might not all agree with the politics of the target operating model, but it's been a beacon of success in the adults and communities arena. And it, only in a few short years. So Help to Live at Home was 2016 or 17. 6 years later, 7 years later, the target operating model is delivering big savings. So, you know, what does that tell us? Tell us that actually officers can get it right. There is leadership to show that as well. But we need more. We need more of this going forward. And I think Councillor Taylor touched on it as well. The council needs to innovate and improve, because if our budgets are dwindling, or we're just going to become a social care provider, to use her words, we need to be innovative to be able to deliver those services. So what do we need more going forward? And what concerns me? Well, actually, one of the biggest concerns, I'm very grateful for the national living wage going up, but if you sit on the Adults Communities Committee, you would have heard last week or a couple of weeks ago, that actually that's going to cost us £20 million Welcome for the people that it's going directly to, but as a council, when we only get £18 million from increasing council tax by 5%, you can see what would happen next year and the year after and the year after that if similar increases happen. So that's a challenge that we have to face. Prolonging net zero, I know Max has touched on it, by knocking up by 5 years extra or taking it to 2050. What does that do? Well, a lot of my residents in Loughborough East are looking forward to car charging points. You know, they live in terraced houses, 2 up, 2 downs, as they call them. Not many have driveways at all, and electric cars are becoming a bigger thing. And the second-hand market for electric cars are becoming more attractive as well. But how are they going to charge them? So that's a big concern as well. So when I look at that, I can understand and I can appreciate why we put the target back, but then that means that the service delivery of those electric charging points potentially might be put back as well, and then we'll have residents on our back asking where they are. So it's one of those where actually, yes, there's financial benefit of putting it back, but there's also the social implication of putting them back as well for having more casework from residents. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. Mr. Newton.
Thank you, Chair. As we're all too aware, we are living through very difficult times at present, really due to the spike in the cost of living. As usual, this is having a greater impact on lower income families for whom life is now particularly difficult. The overall council budget for next year, with its allocation of 27.4 million, is surely the toughest budget allocation in recent years, and merely highlights the gravity of the situation in which this council now finds itself in. Public health concerns us all, and inevitably such a cut in funding will lead to cuts and possible serious reductions in the way in which the money is spent and healthcare rolled out. We are told that the overall savings identified in the health budget will be the result of a review and redesign of services. There is a vagueness about this which is puzzling and to me a little bit worrying. It probably means that the council will inevitably have to focus on essential spending, only resulting in a lower base rate for safer communities. In terms of the crimp, while the plan was to consult over a 12-week period ending in 2023, the number of respondents was relatively small, with 66% being members of the public and 24% staff members. And even though the responses were for the most part positive, the consultation could possibly have been conducted better and maybe differently, and that may have given a higher response rate. Recent research by the Institute of Fiscal Studies shows that local authorities are not being allocated sufficient funding for public services in line with the needs of their population. In the Lancet, the cuts to the public health service have been described as a death by 1,000 cuts. Positive public health interventions are good value for money, and it is estimated for every additional year of good health achieved in the population by public health interventions, the cost is £3,800. This is 3 or 4 times lower than the cost of $13,500, which results from NHS interventions. So you can see public health can do and should do a great job. As I said, this does highlight the cost effectiveness, and it can help people live better lives. So public health is too important a sector to be starved of funding. We can only hope that the council will see its way to using the budget, small as it is, in a way that benefits as many people as possible, especially those in lower income. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. I was at the same meeting, David, yesterday in London, as you know, and it was set questions and answers. And basically, 2 of our MPs, Dr. Luke Evans and Ed Agar, were there to support us and came to that meeting. So I don't know what you say that our MPs weren't supporting us yesterday. Special education needs budget for the transport is growing and growing each year. But I'm proud to say that this council looks after its vulnerable children and makes sure that they get the service they require. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to the officers in the Transport Department that work in that section. They get very, very stressed because obviously parents are stressed trying to sort their children out at late times. They've got their positions at a later time than others. Officers get very stressed because of the amount of, stressed parents on the line. They do a really good job. And we are working very hard in the Transport Department to make sure that the vulnerable, both the elderly and the young, are transported. When we come to funding, I'd like to thank the MPs who have supported us to get the BSEP and the extra £5.84 million that we've got for 24-25. Officers are diligently working to see how we can transform our services across Leicestershire with that money. Our drainage budget has gone up again. We're over £4 million that we're spending on our drainage this year. We've got 100,000 from Network North. We've got money coming in from Network North due to the cancellation of HS2 for next year and possibly the year after, and we're understood that there will be more money coming for the future years. At the present time, we don't have the funding or the knowledge of what we're going to get. That may come next week. So, to put it on record, we do the best with the money that we have in this council, looking after the vulnerable and making sure that our roads are safe. Certainly in my department, I'm very proud of the work they all do, and I'm proud of the officers across this council, how they can work to bring a budget together with this leadership to make sure that it's safe and it's positive for the next year. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Mr. Payne.
Okay, I'd like to speak about the waste and recycling sites in Shepshed and in Market Harborough, but I also try and respond to some of the points that have been raised around our net zero target adjustment. So firstly, on the waste sites, can I say it was a very difficult decision to have to put out to consultation the changes in the operating times and the closure of the 3 sites that we proposed. And I'm extremely pleased that we've been able to, albeit at the 11th hour, following the consultation, respond positively. I think there was a degree of sympathy within the consultation. We had over 5,500 responses, and a lot of people understood our financial predicament. They understood why we're putting the consultation forward, but they made a clear statement that they do not want to lose their valued amenities in their locality, the waste and recycling sites being one of them. And I have to say, to the quip that Max made, I know Christine Radford was out the room, I know you're pleased that the Shepshed waste and recycling site has been, if you like, kept open, but you just say, we're all having to pay for it. Well, that's right. There are, frankly, in parts of this county, areas where there's a lot of residents that struggle to see what they get for their council tax, and waste and recycling sites and other visual public amenities such as roads, etc., they can see what they're getting for their council tax, and it means a lot to them that these public amenities are available for them to access. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to listen to the responses in the consultation, and thanks to the extra money that we received, albeit at the 11th hour, from the government, we've been able to use that quite creatively and ensure that at least 2 of those sites are maintained, albeit on a reduced agenda for the benefit of the public. So that's been a good outcome, all considered. In terms of net zero, I've got a number of thoughts here. Firstly, we set the strategy in the December 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So it's about a 23-24 year strategy, and here we are in 2024, the first opportunity really we've had to assess the performance and actions to date within the strategy. And we've made that assessment in a very honest, transparent way. We've come to scrutiny and we've said, look, on the current trajectory, we're not going to make our suggested targets. our strategy was really ambitious, and I can't believe we're being criticised for having too many projects and actions that we could follow to try and ensure that this county and this authority became net zero by their respective dates. But the truth is, it's been a really difficult couple of years for this authority. We've had the inflation problem, we've had other financial issues that have been ongoing, and as a consequence, we're having to cut our cloth accordingly. We've had staff leave the authority, specialist skilled staff in certain areas. When we set the strategy up initially, it was a collaboration between many of the departments of this county council, but it's predominantly put together by the chief executive's department, some specialist skills in this particular area. We no longer have those skill sets available to us, and we're going to have to adjust our plans to recognise that we do have skill shortages in certain areas, but we also have a lack of resource to be able to put in and see through to the target dates that we initially set. Now, can I just make a point to Joel Meir? Things like charging units, etc., these are largely externally funded from grants, and we will work hard to deliver those programs. They will not be affected. But what we are saying that as an organisation, for instance, to green the whole of our vehicle fleet up will cost millions and millions and millions of pounds. We're not in a position to be able to do that at present. And we recognise, therefore, intellectually, that that will have an impact on our 2030 target. So finally, I think it's very honest and sensible to move that target. And if the next government, or indeed any government, comes along and wants to raise Leicestershire's finances up, we'll be in that luxurious position, maybe be able to bring the targets back to what we initially set. But I'll say this, because I don't know if Max is trying to make a political point when he argues against our net zero strategy, but we've seen from the Labour Party recently, they've just abolished their £28 billion pledge on achieving net zero. Furthermore, they made a pledge last year to decarbonise the national grid by 2030. This will cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions. Every expert says it is physically not possible to do. So if they ever became the next government, I find that they too will have to be backtracking and re-look at some of their proposals they've set out, because they're just not deliverable. We have the honesty and the foresight to say we're not on track to deliver our targets, but if resources become available, we can then look at that again and maybe bring them back to our initial ambition. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Payne. Mr. Ashman.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. I always smile when I hear the Labour Party talk about austerity as if it actually had nothing to do with them. I think bankrupting the country probably had a little bit to do with it, and of course I will remind the Liberal Democrats that they were part of the coalition for 5 years. And actually taking some tough decisions, which, in fairness, they paid a heavy political price for, putting the country first. The biggest problem we face is that this Conservative government has taken forward Labour's funding formula, which is based on a deprivation index, which is highly slewed against places like Leicestershire towards the urban areas. We haven't changed that, and I think the likelihood of an incoming Labour government, God forbid that should happen, of that changing is highly unlikely. So being a political spotter, I've looked through the manifestos. I couldn't find one for the Lib Dems, but I did find one for Labour. Now, I appreciate that it changes on a daily and I think an hourly basis now, but there is nothing in there at all about funding for local government. There's nothing about providing extra money. All there is providing extra burdens, such as the index of all the children within the area, which will fall on this council to have to provide. That will cost us a lot of money to provide. Nothing wrong with it, but it's got to be funded. Also, I'm very interested to hear about, all of a sudden, the conversion on trying to cut back on council tax. I sat on North West Leicestershire District Council for 8 years. During those 8 years, we froze council tax. Every single one of those 8 years, Labour opposed that. So I'm really pleased to hear your conversion. I don't look forward to a change of government, but I have to say that I have very little hope at all that councils like this are going to get any extra money. However, if I'm wrong, I look forward to hearing about that today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. Mr. Bill, it might actually amuse you to find out that I actually agree with you. I think that this council, it's terrible how low funded we actually are. But of course, there was another offer on the table, which was the level 3. I mean, you talk about, that the West Midlands is charging ahead. we could have been in the same position as the East Midlands, but unfortunately, we've got the Liberals over in Rutland, and more so, the Labour mayor that's putting the blockers on this. Why? Who knows? But obviously, this council, this leadership here, we are trying our very best. We're negotiating with the MPs, trying to get more money for this council to ensure that we get a level 2 deal, so that we get something. I'd like to know what the opposition actually opposed to, because what's happening? What are you saying to your leadership to stop us getting that level 3 deal that we so rightly need and deserve? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, very briefly, we'll talk about net zero. I think it's the most important thing we should do as a council is home in on net zero. The world is warming up. We're talking later on this afternoon about flooding caused by various factors, but climate change is one of the big ones. If we don't meet our target of 1.5 or less, then we're going to be in severe trouble. Some of us won't be here to see it. Others, as young children, will be here to see it. Disastrous effect that's going to have. Now, I think this council ought to really think about the targets it set itself. I know that Blake has said that we set ambitious targets. I accept the ambitious targets, but we should actually aim to get those. To put them back by 5 years, I think is unreasonable. I think we need to home in on that and try and bring that target nearer to date so we can hit the target we've already set ourselves. I think with the will there with the council to do it, it's not a political point. I think we all agree the earth is warming up. We need to do something about it. To sit here and just debate various things is not acceptable. I think we really ought to get behind this and actually do something about net zero and actually hit these targets sooner rather than later. I urge Blake and the rest of his team, especially the leader who was there at the meeting, to actually look at this very seriously and see if we can improve the situation we're in. I know it's difficult with the financial situation we're in, but there must be something we can do to bring those targets nearer to date and actually do something about it. I urge the leadership to do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Bolter. Mrs. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to come back to Mrs. Newton, who mentioned public health. I quite agree, public health and prevention is key in preventing things escalating for social care, etc. We need to keep people healthier longer. I will remind members that public health is not funded from the general fund, it's a grant. So there are specific criteria. We are one of the poorest funding for public health, which I have already flagged to the MPs. But I will say that we are nationally recognised for a number of our initiatives, namely the LACS, Local Area Coordination, and also our smoking cessation. We're very flexible with our grant in that if we can provide assistance in other departments where it is health improvement, we do that. Still under the criteria. We're very active in getting bids in, so all the Warm Homes grants, for example, where we're aiding people, to bring their homes up to scratch for, preserving heat, and also the environmental stuff is all through public health. And also to remind members that we were very successful in bringing £5 million in for research, which is right across the county with our universities, with the ICB, with all the people across that can make the difference. So I think we have a very active public health department. We can all do with more money, but I think we are doing very well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Richardson. Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with all my colleagues' comments on the Conservative side, but what I wanted to draw colleagues' attention to, point out, I've just been reading the consultation responses from employees and also from members of the public, and actually a significant number, both internally of LCC employees and also of members of the public actually registered a response on the consultations of the budget that they actually didn't want to see any increase. And in some and actually a small minority wanted to see a decrease in council tax. So what that's telling me is that we have to be, whilst on the one hand we haven't got any choice at the moment about increasing council tax, we have also got to be mindful that that residents and our own staff are concerned about the effect of constantly ratcheting up council tax to pay for services. And just picking up what a couple of the Labour people have mentioned, on the one hand, costs of the council have gone up because there's more increased demand from elderly population and service users. But on the other hand, the costs of the council have gone up because there's been a huge inflationary effect and a massive increase, rightly so, for the bottom end of the pay scale, and disproportionately that's hit authorities like Leicestershire County Council. So what would you just have us do? Not pay those people those wage increases so we can save money and do other things? Or would you rather us pay those people and so they can afford to pay their services, etc.? So it's a difficult thing. Government can't do everything at all levels, and we're here to make those difficult decisions. And all I'd say is it's not easy, and it's very, very difficult to look at the budget and then think about what some of the consequences will be. But I'm grateful for the fact that we have managed to make a change to the waste site in Market Harbour, as mentioned earlier, and also that we are making some efficiency gains by changing some of the way that we're delivering services. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. King. Mr. Richardson, who is the last name I've got on this list. So I presume, Mr. Mullane, you'll then want to move your amendment. But anyway, I'll leave it up to see how we go.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bill said a long time ago about why would people visit Leicestershire and look at Leicestershire County Council. I'll tell him, because we are one of the most, if not the most efficient council in the country. If other councils visited Leicestershire and saw what bang we get for our buck, they would turn up here. If people like Birmingham, Nottingham, Liverpool have perhaps visited here, they might have had plenty of spare money to pass around. Now, my esteemed colleague up here said he couldn't find a Lib Dem manifesto. Well, there is something called a pre-manifesto, which the Lib Dems issued in September 2023, which is a good read. It's about 4 sentences, and basically says nothing about funding for local government. Now, a lot has been made by Lib Dems about only 2 of our MPs signing it. Well, 1 out of 15 Lib Dems MPs was the only person who signed the letter for funding. I've never once heard Sir Ed Davey comment about funding for local councils, and this from a man who can't even apologise to the sub-postmasters. I mean, so, where are we going with this? We have the other side going on about we've increased council tax by above the rate of inflation. Well, I don't know what figure you're looking at, but we haven't. It might be today's rate of inflation, but not the average of the last year. We've had Councillor Bolter who says the most pressing thing facing us is climate. I don't disagree with him. In which case, where is the Lib Dem budget amendments that said this is how we're going to find the money to reinstate the targets, rather than the ridiculous amendments we've got coming up, which are only put forward to go in a focus leaflet, which causes more waste, which has to go to a landfill site or recycling because it's put in the bin. So, be honest, guys, we do the best we can with the money we've got, and I think, I'm proud to have a leader that fights daily with his own government to get more money for Leicestershire. I think that shows we do the right thing for our residents, irrespective of party, and I think this is a brilliant budget and we should all support it.
Yeah. Mr. Mullane.
Sorry, you normally go to the leader of the second opposition first. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Firstly, just to put my thanks on record for the officers and for Lee, who I know has worked really hard to pull together this budget. It's a tough one. It's been tough for many years, and we need change. And change, though, is being driven by budget, and it's been delivered by increasing demand. And actually, at some point, we need to square that circle off. In November, I wrote to Jeremy Hunt before his autumn statement, and I received a response from Simon Hoare, MP, which included a statement of how important he felt local government was to him as a former councillor. He suggested Leicestershire County Council should respond to the consultation on the financial settlement, which I'm sure we did. For the Minister for Local Government to suggest we let them know what's going on was a little bit of a surprise, though. He clearly hadn't been listening. Hopefully when you meet him soon, that will change. We all know what's been going on in this chamber. We've not failed to notice that Leicestershire remains a council with a historically low base, much lower than our peers. For a council that, as a league group, have pointed out already today that we've got robust and found financial grounding, which is great, but the MTFS for 24-25 doesn't balance without needing reserves, and that's the reality that faces us. And the report also identifies we can't use those any more reserves in 25-26 because there simply isn't enough. Of all the cuts we've made to our budgets in recent years, libraries, changes in social care, homelessness, community grants, switching off our streetlights, there are some surprising things that I saw in the budget, and I thought maybe we could bring those forward. We haven't spoken to them about them already. And there's an increase in the capital funding for the Investing in Leicestershire programme. Point 210 indicates we'll increase the investment net of about 40 million. I understand there's a return on these investments, but do we really need to consider, is this a priority? Will this secure the long-term future for Leicestershire residents when a significant number of these investments provide limited social value or increase economic prosperity for Leicestershire? I suppose we should really be asking those questions. Will he be investing in more sheds, maybe, by popping across Leicestershire countryside, or front-funded drive-through in Market Harbour? Are these our priorities? My answer maybe would be no, and maybe we could consider and have a look at those again. At present, we have a legal responsibility to balance a budget, except we don't when we consider the high needs block, where the deficit in 108 is alarmingly now 49 million. It's which is 45% of the annual budget in the high needs block. A deficit that we know now is to be completely unsustainable, yet this government continued to kick this can up the road for somebody else to deal with, somebody else's problem. You've read all the papers, and I'm sure, like me, how can you not be super disappointed that your government have put Leicestershire in this position? Leicestershire, the heart of England, it's a choice. We're well behind the queue when it comes to support from government, but it is a choice from this government. You can point to the leader of another authority to pin out all your frustrations, but it simply doesn't wash. The leaders in Westminster have made those choices and passed those difficult decisions back into local government. We can't get away from it. Devolution may have had some offer, but it won't tackle the crisis in local government. Speak to your colleague in Derbyshire who is really struggling with the impact of social care. It's there for everybody to see. Leicestershire has returned so many Conservatives in this chamber, and in 2019 elected a full slate of Conservative MPs, yet the Conservatives nationally still refuse to listen really to Leicestershire's needs. We do need change, and we need that changes to happen quickly. Leicestershire residents are being asked once again to plug the gap. Well, most of it, as the gap now is far too big. And after 14 years, this government continue not to hear our calls for more funding for Leicestershire. And for that reason, the Labour Group will not be supporting the budget.
Thanks for that. Mr. Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I move Amendment 1 and speak to it and on the budget as a whole. This is a budget that will cost the people of Leicestershire more and deliver them less. At a time of a cost of living crisis that's hitting so many people hard, Leicestershire residents are to be lumbered with a £76 increase in council tax from the county council, all at a time when they will see many services cut back. It's a budget that is the consequence of years of the people of Leicestershire being taken for granted. Leicestershire continues to be the worst funded county council in the country by this Conservative government. And if you look at the research which has been put together on pages 141 to 143, if we were funded to the medium level of other authorities, we would have an extra £120 million. And just imagine how that could transform what we could do as an authority if we were funded to the average. Now, the issue has been raised that the problem is that the funding formula is biased in favour of inner city areas, and that's true. But of course it doesn't take away the fact that Leicestershire is the worst funded county council in the country. And when you look at that table and the comparison between Leicestershire and other counties, you see that there are many affluent southern counties who receive far more money than we do. For example, if we were funded at the same level as East Sussex, we'd have 188 million extra. If we were funded at the same level as Dorset, we'd have 150 million extra. At the same level as Surrey, 125 million extra. At the same level as Kent, 89 million extra. Oxfordshire, 62 million. Buckinghamshire, 59 million. So we continue to be placed at the bottom of the league table for funding, at the back of the queue for support by this government. And the consequence is that the people of Leicestershire paying more in council tax than they would otherwise have to, and seeing fewer services than they are entitled to in return. And people see this with the condition of roads, the huge amount of potholes that go unrepaired, the conditions of pavements, where we ask for them to be repaired and we're told that there isn't the money, the huge pressure on the special education needs services, the cuts to bus services, and the other cutbacks that people see. And since 2010, Leicestershire has elected all Conservative MPs, and it's had a Conservative-run county council since 2001. Yet still we haven't got the fair funding, still we are the worst funded county. At meeting after meeting of this county council, we hear of another meeting with the ministers, asking them for more money for a fair deal for Leicestershire County Council, and yet still we haven't had it. We hear time and time again how Tory ministers have listened to the county council's case for fair funding, sympathise with it, and then promptly ignore it and continue to take us for granted. Now, an argument has been put by the Conservative leadership of the council this afternoon that we shouldn't look at this in isolation, that the fact that Leicestershire is the worst funded county is only part of a wider picture in which the fire service is amongst the worst funded, the police service is amongst the worst funded. But surely, if you're Conservatives, that just adds to a wider picture that all our services are being unfairly funded by a Conservative government, and we're being put to the back of the queue by the government. And we hear today that we're going to have the leadership and MPs meet with Simon Hoare, the Minister, to ask for more money for fair funding after the budget. But are we going to really see any change? If we look back at the meeting of September 2023 in the County Council leader's position statement, he mentions a meeting with Lee Rowley about fair funding where there was warm words but still no delivery of fair funding. In the May 2023 County Council leader's position statement, it refers to a meeting with Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. Again, warm words but no delivery of fair funding. The February 2020 County Council meetings leader statement welcomed the appointment of Rishi Sunak as Chancellor and noticed that he was a supporter of fair funding. But sadly, 4 years on, Sunak as Chancellor and Prime Minister, in the two positions where you would expect him to be best placed to remedy the situation, has still not delivered. The February 2019 leader's statement refers to a meeting with then Tory Minister Sir Alan Duncan in which the case for fair funding was put, but still no delivery. And the March 2018 leader's statement refers to a meeting with the then junior local government minister Rishi Sunak in which he was sympathetic to the government's cause, but as we know, all these years later, and despite being in a position to do so, he still hasn't delivered for Leicestershire. Fair funding has been a fiasco and a failure, and an out-of-touch Tory government has taken our area for granted and continues to ignore the plight of the people of Leicestershire and put us at the back of the queue. Because of the dire financial situation the County Council is in, the manoeuvre is limited, as many services have already been cut right back to the bone. So it's been a challenge to find savings, and as we can see, we have an 83 million financial gap in the budget up to 2027-2028. However, we do believe that if we're trying to help with tackling climate change and also dealing with the isolation that many people in rural areas face, we must seek to try and invest more in public transport. Therefore, we have put forward this amendment. Obviously, we would hope that there was more money that we could put into it, but because of the unfair situation we're in and the lack of money, it is obviously not as much as we would hope, but we are suggesting that we scrap the County Council magazine, Leicestershire Matters. This would save £108,000, and we think that in these difficult times, that money can be better spent on investing in more bus services. We also propose reducing the Cabinet by 1 from 10 members to 9. Given that until 2020, the Cabinet was seemingly fine to be able to run itself with 8 members, reducing it to 9 seems a reasonable suggestion that would save another 22,000 that we could invest in bus services. I've spoken to many residents in my area who feel sharply the loss of the number 1 and 2 bus services that served Hinckley through to Barwell and Earl Shilton, and many people in the villages on the routes from the bus service that served my area, the 159 from Hinckley to Colville, many in those villages also miss that service as well. And increasing the bus budget can at least help to maintain bus services and hopefully perhaps even see us being able to bring back some of these services, even if it's in a more limited service than previously. I hope today councillors can show their commitment to the importance of public transport in Leicestershire by supporting Amendment 1 to increase funding for bus services. Year after year, the people of Leicestershire have had to put up with being put to the back of the queue by this government. Year after year, they get warm words, but no delivery of fair funding. The consequence of this Conservative government taking Leicestershire for granted is we get fewer services and higher council tax for the people of Leicestershire. This government has had far too many chances to deliver a fair deal for Leicestershire, and it has consistently refused to do so. Only a general election and the chance to remove this government and the Leicestershire Tory MPs who failed to deliver fair funding can give the people of Leicestershire the chance of the fair deal and quality public services they deserve, and so therefore I move Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mullaney. Mr Bray, you're second.
I second and reserve my remarks, Chairman.
Oh, right, fine. So, Mr Rushton.
Thank you, Chairman. I speak to the amendment mainly, but just a few marks. I mean, Michael, it is exasperating that the work we've done, and you recognise the work that we've done, meeting members of Parliament. There's no getting away from it. It is exasperating, but I can promise you that while we're the administration, we will continue to keep going to meet members of Parliament whenever any meetings are offered, and it is hard to get them, and the latest one's being facilitated by Dr Luke. I don't suppose we'll get any money before a general election, but I think it's beholden on us as the administration to keep banging on about it, because eventually somebody will listen and appreciate the work we do with the limited resources we've got. I don't hold out any great hope for any Liberal members of Parliament to lobby after the next election. That includes yourself, Michael, who seems perfectly happy to constantly lose in Hinckley Bosworth, but I thank you for reminding us of the work we do in trying to get fair funding for Leicestershire. On your amendment, Michael, the Leicestershire Matters. Now, we like Leicestershire Matters because it reaches parts of the population other communications can't reach. So if you look at what Leicestershire Matters does, and remember, Michael, we reduced the budget over the years from 750,000 down to 108. So we've gone a long, long way towards what you're wanting. So when you put this magazine out and consult people, 62% say they actually receive it. And that's really, really high compared to other publications that are put out county-wide. We all get loads of junk mail through the letterbox. 85 to 90% of people who receive it read it, which is, again, an amazing figure. And 78% say they found it useful to find out what the council does. So I think for 108,000, it's particularly good value in communicating with all residents of Leicestershire, but in particular those that aren't as up to date with the internet and modern forms of technology. I mean, everybody thinks everybody communicates with each other on Twitter, WhatsApp and all that stuff. There are vast amounts of people who do not. And I honestly think for 108,000, it's money well spent, and will be, for clarity, opposing your amendment. On the reduction of cabinet members, you could pass this motion, but it's not actually within your gift to oppose, to reduce cabinet members. The appointment of cabinet members up to 9 falls to the leader of who forms the administration. So even if you say no here, I could still appoint 9. And if I'm honest, Michael, you've said we used to have 8. Well, we did, but the work is even more onerous now, and not only onerous physically, but onerous emotionally. You know, when they're making some of the decisions they're having to make, to load more decisions onto less people, I don't think, again, is in the best interests of this council. And then finally, Michael, where are you wanting to spend the money? Laudable as it is to want to put more money into subsidised bus services, we have a bit of a problem coming next year. We already spend, and Ozzy will probably talk a bit more about stuff to me, we already spend nearly £2 million on subsidising bus services out of our general budget. We're getting in 5.84 million from the BSIP, which the government has given us through lobbying the members of Parliament. We're getting that money in. So if I'm honest, I'm going to actually struggle, and I'm going to do our utmost, but we're going to struggle to spend 7.8 million-ish in 1 year. Now, 130,000, laudable as it is, I think it's just tokenism, Michael, for something to put as an amendment to the county council budget, so we don't say, oh, you've made no effort, all you do is criticise us. If you're being sensible and wanting to be strategic, you ought to listen to Bill. You should have put something down about net zero. So I would advise my side and urge them to vote against this amendment and support the motion moved by Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Rushton. Mr. Merry.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened intently for the last hour and a bit to all of the debate on the budget from all around the chamber, and I'm just wondering if there's a general election coming down the track with all the mini-party political broadcasts that we've had. But a budget for this council is quite a large council. It's not something that's put together 2 hours before full council. It's an ongoing complex programme of work by officers and councillors, cabinet members, and the cabinet members have a very large and complex portfolios, and they all work very hard to put a budget, a robust and balanced budget together. But the Lib Dem amendments, the motions given to us at the 11th hour, sorry, 12th hour, because we only got it at 12 o'clock, to me, it's ineptitude on how budgets should be managed, and it's lastminute.com politics. And as my learned colleague in front of me said, they're probably hoping to gather material for the leaflets for the forthcoming election. So say to the Lib Dems, if you want meaningful input into the budget settings, and you want us to take it seriously and to give the officers a chance to do due diligence in time, book early to avoid disappointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merry. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have to say, I'm actually quite curious about part of the amendment, specifically the proposal to cut Leicestershire Matters, and how that squares with motion passed by Hinkley and Bosworth Borough Council just in this past December regarding the digital divide. And I'll quote, "This council calls upon Leicestershire County Council and the government to ensure that their own services, government offices, national corporations and banks that utilise online services do not negatively impact on those who are unable to access digital equipment in line with the Equalities Act 2010. So it was a little bit of double standards, Mr. Mayor. And just quickly before I sit down again, regarding the 1 and 2 bus, possibly part of the reason that ended up being cut was the fact, compared to pre-COVID, usage was down between 70 to 80%. So are we actually proposing running empty buses around? And how does that sit with the climate crisis? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually quite rare for me to speak in this chamber. I normally sit and listen, mind my words. But on the amendment suggested by the Liberal Democrats about cancelling Leicestershire Matters, I am absolutely flabbergasted. And it kind of follows from Mr. Allen's comments about the Hinckley and Bosworth proposals. So I don't understand, I'm afraid, hence the use of the word flabbergasted. I'm flabbergasted that the Liberal Democrat group here at the County Council think that it is a good idea to cancel Leicestershire Matters, which is the only key communication and information tool that promotes and provides important information about the good work of this authority as a whole. It goes to every single household, those very same households who pay for the services that we provide. So it is right and it is proper that this council keeps all of our residents informed of the work of this council and the help, the opportunities and the support available. Mr. Mullaney has just commented on the isolation of rural areas, but then tables an amendment to stop Leicestershire Matters being delivered to those people who he says feel isolated. For the record, around, last time I checked, between 25 and 28% of society are not digitally enabled. And I cannot, under any circumstances, understand why any elected representative could or would support the active exclusion of around a quarter of the population, many of whom may well be our most vulnerable and needy, from the good work, the support available by and from this authority. I will not support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Phillimore. Mr. Park.
Derbyshire County Council and its job description for Cabinet support members lists 13 key duties. And this role is recognised in the statutory guidance under the Local Government Act 2000. I was trying to do 2 in 1. So my apologies to everybody for that. So I'll try again. Take 2. In November 2023, on each Leicestershire doormat, that's approximately 300,000 houses, arrived Leicestershire Matters. And it was important for these reasons: trading standards advice, staying safe this winter, food and fuel support, the waste site proposals, personal assistant vacancies that we advocate strongly in adults and communities, family hubs, winter support for families. Now, there's a key thread amongst all of this list, and it's this, that almost all of those persons involved there would be classed as vulnerable. So are we against reaching out to our most vulnerable communities and residents with vital information, help and support? Now, it could be that this was an anomaly, a good Leicestershire Matters, the others weren't so relevant. So let's look at the summer 2023 version. and that spoke about road maintenance. Telling the public about our scrutiny function, what we actually do here. 2 pages on 3 days out at our parks at a time when people are struggling to afford places to take their children. Our heritage sites, which again in adults and communities play a vital role in bringing people into Leicestershire and bringing money into our county. And a section on joining the County Council's social care team, an utterly crucial section of what we do at adults and communities. So it may seem to some people that they can just access this digitally. I hope here that I've given you a list that shows we're actually reaching our most vulnerable section that we need to look after. And in our manifesto, we said we would look after and protect and provide for.
Thank you, Mr. Parton. Mr. O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Leicestershire Matters. Certainly, my residents like reading Leicestershire Matters because it's very informative. It tells them what we're doing. In the winter, it tells them what we're particularly doing with gritting and whatever. But it also gives them information, you know, during crisis, during the problems, helping them with benefits, helping them with various issues. All the things that the council, the social care does, the children and young families do, the hubs. It's an informative. We've heard about 28% of, you know, the population are not on the internet. Are we going to deny that? Are you going to take away the Borough Bulletin at Hinckley? No, probably not. Are we borrowing though? Are we borrowing to keep it? The bus services, we're working hard here to get the bus services moving. We've got the grant from the government and we will be looking next year, as the leader has said, to review all the bus services. We've been doing that for the last few months to support areas that have got problems. It's a 1 year money that we've got. Is this a one trick that you're putting forward for 1 year? We need to look after our residents regularly. Our service here, I'm very proud to say that we do very well across Leicestershire. The bus service we can't actually support services that are not viable, that actual service providers say they're not viable, that they have to give the routes up. When you've got low numbers on buses, it doesn't make the case for that service provider to do it. At the present time, you know, we're supporting 1.9 million odd worth of subsidies. We're in a financial position where we can't continue to do all this. But fortunately, our MPs have worked with us to get this funding, and hopefully, when the next government comes in, it might give us funding. Labour may help us, I hope. So, I am holding my breath. But when we're looking for the future, whatever government is, we need them to support us. We know at the moment we're struggling. We know that we've not been fair funded. We've tried very hard. We've knocked on the door. When the Liberal Democrat was in administration with our government, did they help us still? No, they didn't. We've been in this position for quite a few years, but we are not an administration that will keel over. We'll work for the benefit of our residents and we'll work for those that need our help in Leicestershire. And I will not support your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Mr. Hills.
Thank you, Chairman. When I was first elected to this chamber, another council member said to me, and I won't embarrass them by saying who it was, but he said, you've been elected now to make the hard decisions, not the easy decisions. And we've had a lot of hard decisions over the last few years. Now, in this amendment, they're proposing getting rid of a cabinet department, firing a member of staff, getting rid of Leicestershire Matters, and moving hundreds of thousands of pounds around the budget. We need to scrutinise that, and it's a very difficult decision. And I'm disappointed, therefore, that they've only given us 2 hours to consider this. If you asked a resident at home, you went back and said, how long do you think you should have for councillors to think about motions that affect hundreds of thousands of pounds to our budget? They would say half a week, a week. If you said we've been given 2 hours to come up with this decision, they'd laugh at you and think it's ridiculous. And I understand the leader asked as well for advance notice of the motion, and it wasn't given. So in the future, I think far more notice is going to be needed if we're to consider supporting these such motions. The other thing that I wanted to mention was on Leicestershire Matters, because unlike the people over here, I actually quite enjoy reading Leicestershire Matters. I've never been in it, and I probably never will be, to be honest. But I still enjoy it nonetheless. And I'm lucky, actually, because I don't just read one lot of council newspapers, I get the Borough Bulletin as well. So therefore, I was a bit nervy at 12 o'clock when I read that they were proposing to get rid of the Borough Bulletin, because I thought surely the honourable and ethical thing would be that if one isn't cost-effective, the other isn't. And so I was worried that you might be getting rid of it in the Borough Council, but I understand now you've said that you're not going to. It leads me to think, why aren't they getting rid of it for Hinckley and Bosworth? And the only thing I can think of is because there's one lot of faces on Leicestershire Matters, and there's another lot of faces on the Borough Bulletin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hills. Mrs Radford.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's not very often I stand up, but you had me 3 times today. I can't support this amendment because the Leicestershire Matters are very good for my department. I give them information about what's happening, and also we pick up on the last time that we mentioned about a grant available for people leaving hospital and you're being a carer. We've picked up quite a lot of new carers that weren't on the system. We wouldn't have been able to have done that any other way. I mean, I'm not digitally very good at all. I would never look at anything on the computer in case I blew something up or something. But this gets out to everybody. And if you read something and then you can say, oh, that'll be good for such and such down the road. I wonder if she's picked it up. So it's something that you can pass on the information, and it is a lot of good information there, not just about children or roads or whatever, but about what is available and what grants are available. So I cannot support this. And I understand it only costs 12 or 13 pence per person. Well, I mean, I always used to quote how much cigarettes were. Well, you couldn't even get one puff of a cigarette for 13p.
Thank you, Mrs Radford. I've got no other speakers, so Mr Bray, you've reserved your...
Yes, thank you, Mr Chairman. Look, I think we've got into this debate. I think we've lost sight of where the purpose of this amendment is coming from on this, and that is because we are concerned through the feedback we have had from our constituents, my constituents in Hinckley and Burbage, Michael's constituents in Mr Hill's division. I have to say, has filled my postbox as much as it is in my own division, about concerns about cutting of bus services over the years, and it's happened piecemeal, and we've sat there and we've sort of said, isn't it a shame, and and all the rest of it. But cutting these bus services cuts a way of life for people. It affects their mental health. It affects their access to vital services. It affects their independence. It affects the impact on our town centres because the very generations of people who still want to go to town to do shopping now can't get there in many cases. And in some cases, Mr Chairman, it's cost people their will to live. It really has, because they feel that they can't go out, they can't get out anymore independently, and they feel, what's the point in going on? So that is why we've decided today to put this amendment. Now, much has been said about Hinckley and Bosworth and the Borough Bulletin. Look, I in better times, I would not be standing here arguing the council should get rid of its magazine. I would not be arguing that. But we are in desperate times, Chairman. We've heard from various gentlemen. We are effectively bankrupt. Now, I understand what the leader said about never. But well, we are plugging gaps in funding by using reserves. massive gaps in funding. That is not sustainable. We've heard from the people opposite that they don't think any government coming forward is going to give us any more money. So therefore, what are they going to do in future years? That is the road to bankruptcy. So what I would say is that it's a choice, isn't it? It's a choice between your glossy magazine or your public services. And that is what we're saying to make. Now, in terms of the Cabinet members, we heard from the Deputy Leader. The Deputy Leader stood up and said, we're rapidly turning into an adult social care authority. Well, and other services are falling back. So therefore, the political leadership in those services that are falling back can be cut back and put that money into public services. So as I say, it's all about political choices at the end of the day. You can back your glossy magazine, or you can back people's bus services. It's as simple as that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brecon.
Thank you, Chair. I will be voting against this proposal, this amendment. I think it's a shame it's so late in the day. I mean, I looked at the amendment. I mean, in our budget that we presented today, there are no savings at all on bus services due to the BSIP money. I mean, you've heard today the leader has said 1.94 million in the 24-25 budget towards bus subsidies. So your sort of monies that you were suggesting, 130k, really doesn't add that much value to that. And we have this 5.84 million next year from the BSIP money. And that is sufficient. So I think if you're going to put motions that can amend budgets, maybe an alternative budget in total would be a useful document to bring to the table. I think also my frustration here is that you've had ample opportunity, I think, to bring these suggestions through the consultation process. You didn't do that. The scrutiny committee and the commission process that we have, and I'm sure Mr. Mullaney in his role as chairman of the scrutiny commission would sort of agree with me that that's what these forums are for. That's for members to share ideas and bring it. It's obviously cross-party, and we should be bringing these ideas on the budget that we present. So we've heard passionately today, 12p a copy. I think Leicestershire matters. It does matter, and I think certainly to the residents of Leicester, it's much loved. We have improved our communications. I mean, when we looked at communications, we've had huge savings since 2016 across our communications department. We've changed the way we operate. We've got Facebook pages, we've got WhatsApp, we've got TikTok, we've got a website that's fit for purpose. We're doing so much with technology and change that I think we ought to be proud of what we do, and I think Leicestershire Matters complements that. Our colleagues in my colleagues in the chamber today have spoken passionately, and I certainly thank them for that. But I've got no issues. The only one I comment is we're going bankrupt. We're certainly not. I mean, Declan Keegan, passionate Section 151 officer, Director of Resources. He's risk assessed and said the assessment on the budget, he's assured that this budget's fit for purpose, and he's one of the advocates that this council will not be in a Section 114 position like others around us have fallen. So that's my comments on this, and certainly I'll be opposing this motion for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brecon. So we will now take a vote on the amendment, and this, because it's a financial one, has to be a recorded vote. So I will ask Lauren here to read out everyone's name, and you either vote for the amendment or against the amendment. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so as mentioned, this is a matter relating to the budget and the precepts requirement in the standing orders of the council that we have a recorded vote. I'll read out your name in alphabetical order and invite you to indicate whether you're voting for or against the motion moved by Mr. Mullaney and seconded by Mr. Bray, or if you're abstaining from voting. Mr. Allen. Mr. Ashman. Mr. Bannister. Mr. Barclay.
Against.
Mr. Bedford. Against. Mr. Bill. Mr. Bolter. Mr. Bray. Mr. Brecon.
Against.
Mrs. Broadley. Mr. Champion.
Against.
Mr. Chapman. Against. Mr. Charlesworth. Mr. Coxon. Dr. Feltham.
Against.
Mr. Frisbee.
Against.
Mrs. Fryer. Mr. Galton. Mr. Gamble. Mr. Gattaraya. Mr. Gillard. Mr. Grimley. Mrs Hack, Mr Haji Nicolaou, Mr Harrison, Mr Harrison Rushton, Mr Hills, Mr Hunt, Mrs Jordan, Mr King, Mr Lovegrove, Mr Merry, Mr Mear, Mr Morgan, Mr Mullaney, Mrs Newton, Mr O'Shea, Mr Orson, Mrs Page, Mr Payne, Mr Parton, Mr Pendleton, Mr Phillimore, Mr Poland, Mrs Posnett, Mrs Radford, Mrs Richardson, Mr Rushton, Mrs Seaton, Mr Shepherd, Mr Smith, Mrs Taylor,
Against.
Mrs. Sorry, I've missed you out, Mr Richardson. I apologise. Mr Richardson. Mrs Wright. Mrs A Wright, sorry. Mrs M Wright. Thank you. Against. 39 against. So the amendment's not carried.
Yes, the amendment is lost. So we move, it's 4:20, to second amendment, Mr Galton.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I thought you were thinking of taking a tea break then, but obviously not. I rise to move an amendment in my name. The purpose of this amendment is to challenge the current priorities, or some of the priorities that are contained in this budget by the administration, but yet show it's still possible to identify significant amounts of money that could be used to carry out very important works and to make a difference. So referring to my amendment, this is showing a way which we can use revenue and turn it into capital to create 1.5 million for highway drainage works. Now, I hope we're not going to get into a debate like we did on the last amendment in relation to priorities, choices, and which is more important, because you'll see how I'm suggesting this could be funded. This group has, along every year, challenges whether we need cabinet support members, or AKA bag carriers, what role they really fulfil. Yes, there's always a need for someone to stand in for someone when they're not available. But that could be a cabinet member. As we've heard, there are plenty of cabinet members in the administration. The second area proposed is in relation to the role of a policy advisor. Now, we've heard all afternoon how dire the funding situation is, how it's going to get worse in future years. And on this side...
Just a minute. You specifically said a particular post when you said that.
It's down here in the amendment as written, Chairman.
No, it's not.
Well, it is on my paper. It says delete post of policy advisor to executive.
No.
The amendment refers to reduce support to the Cabinet. The standing orders preclude discussions about individual staff members in
Okay, am I working off the wrong piece of paper? I think I'm working off what I was sent earlier.
Okay. In that way, we can empty the chamber.
Chairman, can I ask, are we in danger of going in areas where we shouldn't be and should go into confidential, as the particular post has been mentioned? Yeah, but he's already said it.
That's the worry.
Into confidential session to protect the person's post has been specifically mentioned.
I mean, we can't sort of undo what has been said, but if the future comments are restricted to the general, which is how it's described in the amendment as reducing support to the Cabinet, it's fine. But if there is any suggestion that's going to be personalised in any way, then it would be appropriate, I think, to have it go into confidential session.
So 55,000 could be achieved by reducing support to the Cabinet, Chairman, and I've illustrated that that together would raise £88,000, which could be used for capital contribution, 1.5 million for drainage schemes. Now, as I indicated earlier, 2 years ago, the leader wrote to all the MPs advising them of the situation the County Council was facing in relation to a whole range of services, and that if action wasn't taken to improve the funding situation, what that meant. So just reflecting on that, at that time, 2 years ago, I imagine the situation deteriorated further since then, although I do note from Mr O'Shea that we're hopeful of getting some of this money from the cancellation of HS2, but that indicated that 23 million backlog of carriageway works, 4.2 million of footway works, and 5.5 million of drainage works, highway drainage works. So when it said earlier that you've managed to rustle up 400,000 or whatever it is additional for drainage, that is going to go nowhere near the backlog identified 2 years ago of 5.5 million. And recent events have highlighted that. And yes, we can go along and clean gullies out, and we can do all that, but that is not going to address the fundamental issue, as I understand it, particularly where we need substantial capital works, replacing culverts, major works to improve our highway drainage systems. So this amendment's very simple. It asks members to think again about the priorities. It shows that there are choices available to us, and we can raise additional money by taking tough decisions, as we've been reminded about this afternoon, and we can raise that money and address, hopefully, start to address the backlog of highway drainage works, which became very, very apparent a few weeks ago in the recent flooding that we suffered and will be ongoing. So I hope, Chair, we don't get into an argument about priorities. What I've sought to do here is illustrate how we could raise 1.5 million for what I believe is a very high priority, and I'm happy to move that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Galton. Mrs. Jordan, I think you were going to second the motion. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Although I'm new to the council, I feel as though I need to speak out about the problems that's caused by flooding in my division. This was an issue that was highlighted to me by the residents of Blaby and Glenparva both before and after the election. People were worried about the problems that the floods caused and are fearful that these will only get worse due to the impacts of climate change. Crow Mills it causes huge floods and problems in my area. The road's been closed 6 or 7 times during this year, which causes misery for loads of people trying to get in and out of the villages, trying to go to work and go about their business. A similar problem occurs in Blaby under the railway bridge, the entry to the village from Glenparva, where cars get stuck, they ignore the warnings and try to drive through the floods. And as well as cars getting stuck and blocking the roads, it creates waves of water which causes flooding in houses. At least twice this year, all the roads into and out of several of the villages, including Blaby and Countersthorpe, were blocked due to the flooding. One lady stopped me recently and told me about her concerns. She is a carer, and one day she was trying to meet a patient in Countersthorpe to give him his vital medication, but she couldn't get into the village at all. She tried all the roads and none were passable, and so she had to leave him without his medication that night. She was worried all night about what might happen. Residents in Glenparva pointed out that the traffic on Little Glen Road, which is normally very busy, more than doubles when Crow Mills is closed, causing extra noise and pollution, and meaning that residents can't get off their driveways and all journeys take considerably longer. Currently, there are 3 planning applications in Countersthorpe and 1 in this area of Glenparva.
Although I appreciate the need for more housing, these developments can only compound the problem caused by the floods, causing extra traffic using the area and lead to excess water use and excess wastewater. These problems cause day-to-day misery for countless residents, causing them to worry about what's going to happen in the future. I appreciate that the budget is extremely tight, but I feel that it's vital that we find the money from somewhere to address the flooding issue. And this is an investment that would benefit the people for years to come. All right.
Point of order, Chair. I think the opposition could have shown some respect listening to a maiden speech. Talking amongst themselves and making a row was disrespectful.
Mr. Rushton.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, we won't be supporting this motion. Can I remind the new member that this is a strategic issue. The motion, I presume, is proposing that the money is spent throughout the county. Are you proposing that this money is just spent in Blaby and Glenparva? I think you're being more strategic than that, but the new lady, I think, is confused that it's not going to be all spent in Blaby and Glenparva. And also remember that not all gullies are blocked because the gully is blocked. Outside my house, the drain was blocked because of the amount of detritus that had blown into it. So I went out there in my Wellingtons and a broom, and I could clear that drain in 5 minutes because it was the muck that was sitting on top of the grill. And also remember, and Ozzy will tell you when he comes back, not all gullies and all flooding problems are the result of the county council responsibility. So I'll just say why we're not supporting it. Who moved it? Forget now. Simon. We've already got £4 million in our budget for next year. 4 million. So we've got revenue and capital. We've also got more money probably coming from Network North. We do know we do have some problems, and we are working through them, and we're working through them diligently. That's why we put another £400,000 into TOR's department, as I call it, which is dealing with some of the flooding we've had and designing schemes to deal with it. And then I don't honestly think, Simon, that we could spend the additional money with the money we've got in. And also, Simon, one of the big things I don't want to do is this is borrowing. So you're proposing to borrow an additional £1.5 million and fund it with the revenue savings you've identified. I don't want to take on any more borrowing. Any borrowing we're doing is we're trying to keep it to an absolute minimum, especially whilst interest rates are high. They may well go down a bit this year, but they're still historically high. And then to fund it, you want to reduce the allowances budget by removal of the 4 cabinet support members. Well, to be fair to you, you vote against it every year, and you can continue to vote against it every year, and we will continue to support the 4 cabinet support members. Ted will tell you some of the jobs that they do. I won't go through them because he's got a full list of 13. But also it's useful to have them. They do a good job, but it's also a good place for members to learn the ropes, if you know what I mean. To promote someone, say, from straight as a scrutiny job to a cabinet job is a task. So having people as cabinet support members is useful progression for members of the group. And now, if you wanted to save money from members' allowances, I could find you quite a bit of an allowance to save. I could withdraw the money from the Leader of the Opposition, poor old Mr. Mullaney. I could reduce the allowance to the Leader of the Labour Group. I could take away the Scrutiny Commissioner's allowances. I think that's poor old Mr. Mullaney again. We've got scrutiny chairs you could take the allowances off. Well, we've never ever wanted to do that because we think on this side we could take mine, but you've not mentioned mine, have you? We don't want to take away scrutiny chairs allowances because we value scrutiny and we like to pay them a commensurate amount from the job. And then the final one, Simon, where you erred in judgment when you first mentioned it, reduce supports to the cabinet. Now, we all know who you're getting at. We're not going to say it, but we all know what you're doing. But support to the cabinet starts with the chief. All cabinet, all senior officers, in fact, all people here work for us. So you're specifically targeting a person who we all know, you're not allowed to mention, but the Chief is support to the Cabinet. Lauren is support to the Cabinet. We are the administration, and we think the person who you are not allowed to mention does a bloody good job, if I'm honest. And even if you were successful today in passing this motion, the money's not there for at least a year, because you cannot just sack a person because a Liberal puts it on a notice of motion. So your funding isn't there to borrow your money for the drainage. So we will oppose this motion on a matter of principle.
Thank you, Mr. Ruston. Mr. Merry.
Thank you, Chair. I will be opposing this motion, and although we all would like extra work done on the flooding defences and all the rest of it, I do think it's strange that the Lib Dems have come to this meeting with this item on the agenda. I've been on the Highways Transport and Scrutiny Committee since I joined the council, and if I'm wrong, I'll apologise at the next council meeting, but I can't remember any of the Lib Dems putting forward an item on the agenda to look at drainage issues. It gets discussed with regards to flooding and all the rest of it, but they've never put it forward on the agenda. Bring it to scrutiny, put it on the agenda, comments go to Cabinet, and that's how we get stuff done. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Merry. Mr. Parton.
I bet you're all wondering what I'm going to say now. So, take two. Derbyshire County Council, in its job description, you didn't think I was going to say that, but to be serious, Derbyshire County Council, in its job description for a Cabinet support member, lists 13 key duties. And this role is recognised in the statutory guidance under the Local Government Act, year 2000. This is not new legislation. Now, in Adults in Communities, in a department with a £215 million budget where we're struggling with demand, would we not wish to support Mrs Radford to ensure such a large council department functions to the very best of its ability? And there are three key points to remember. The first one is time. Mrs Radford physically and mentally cannot attend. Hold on. I tried to make serious points here. She cannot physically and mentally attend all the meetings and commitments that are put on her. She can't do it. The diaries clash. She cannot be in control of all the information all the time because there's simply too much. Now, secondly, scrutiny. Now, in our most recent Lead members briefing, we went through the latest figures, the budgetary figures in our department. There are 45 separate lines of duty. And it seems best practice to assist Mrs Radford to manage these 45 areas. That's 45. And third, experience. Now, any organisation works best when people's experience and skills are applied to maximum effect. And Mrs Radford recognises this. She has given me duties to do because she realises that that's where my skill set lies. And the reality is that a job description for the Cabinet support, not only in Derbyshire, is also available on the Leicestershire County Council website, backed up by government legislation dating back to the year 2000.
So, thank you, Mr. Parton.
Not being in two places at once. I wasn't actually trying to be serious.
Yeah, well, true. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be extremely succinct because I'm absolutely dying for a toilet comfort break. I should declare an interest, really, because as Ted, I'm a bag carrier, actually. I'm support Cabinet to Ozzy O'Shea. And I must say, as what Ted's alluded to, although Ozzy is quite a superman, as been demonstrated and recently in the floods in Ratby. I know that working with him over the past 3 years, he physically and mentally hasn't got enough hours in the day or in the week to do the amount of work and growth that's come into his portfolio. So I'm sorry about that, Ozzy. Councillor Galton mentioned when he proposed the motion that it's to make do very important work and to make a difference. I do believe my role as support cabinet member does make a difference. And I would just give you an example. Probably one of the most mentioned words this afternoon has been flooding. I actually sit on the Trent and the Anglian regional flood and coastal committees, which I attend, and I'm also on the innovation group. And by being on that is driving forward transformation and giving us opportunities to get more money into Leicestershire to support our residents and to get mitigations into place. It is a hardiest task. It takes 3 or 4 years to do it after Section 19 flooding reports are made. If I wasn't there representing Leicestershire, we wouldn't have a voice, or Ozzy would have to give up something else which is more important, well, not more important than this, but would have to give up something as equally important to do this. So this is valuable work, but it is an opportunity that we do to drive forward growth, transformation, which helps our residents and will certainly help them in the future with climate change and what's being predicted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mrs. Wright. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just want to mention, it was mentioned from the other side about respect when other members are talking, but I think that goes both ways, so maybe you should think about your own behaviour as well before you condemn this side for your behaviour. I do take exception to that bag carrier label that you think. I am perfectly capable of carrying my own bag, thank you. So I find that quite disrespectful comment to make. And let's just look at the children's department. So I have over 200 statutory duties, as I'm sure you well know from my predecessor, Ivan Old, mentioning it several times, so I'm carrying on that mantle for him. But I can't do that on my own. It is physically impossible. No matter how fit and young and energetic I are, I cannot do that myself. And at the moment, my bag carrier, as you call him, or as I call him, my support cabinet member, Mr. Smith, is dealing with the Send an Alternative Provision national programme where we're a pilot, which is a huge piece of work on top of everything else that we're doing within the department, and how you can expect one person to do that, along with all their other duties that I need to do as the lead member for children, families and regulatory service, I may add as well. So I have a huge portfolio. But I think your comments just show a complete lack of understanding about the work that Cabinet do, the work that the Cabinet support does, and the work that our Cabinet support members do. But obviously, you're not in control, so you wouldn't understand. But I think due respect is worth both ways. You have no understanding, and to call them bag carriers, I think, is just totally disrespectful.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. Mr. King.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't be supporting this amendment, but just to pick up a couple of things that Mr. Galton said, you're right. You do need to take tough decisions. So, and I just want to reflect on a decision that in another council, the incoming administration, which Mr. Galton is part of, in his newly elevated position, what the decision they made about the cabinet at that other authority last May. So we were running it with 5 cabinet members. The first thing they did was increase it to 8. So, and then tell everyone how we were, shall we say, financially strapped, which isn't the case. But so I do think you have to practice what you preach, and instead of coming along and telling us how we should cut this and cut that. So that's what I wanted to say. And also the other thing about the work, excellent work the LNFA is doing. So in Market Harbour West, about 4 years ago, we had a flood incident with surface water, and the LFFA is still doing the work to work out what the actual programme of works will be needed to actually, you know, sort that out. It is not a straightforward thing. You can't just spend the money in 1 year. It takes a while to work it out and actually work with all the relevant partners to then come up with a plan that you can actually deliver over a period of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr King. Mr
Thanks. It's really ditto to what's been said. I echo what Mrs Taylor said, which is it's actually quite insulting to those of us who are Cabinet support members, the amount of work we do, making sure that there's representation for Leicestershire where the leader can't be there. That's our job, to make sure that we are fighting our corner, even if we don't make much progress. And finally, I'll just put on record that I don't think I've ever carried Councillor Rushton's bag anywhere, nor will I in the future, and I'm sure he won't bother to ask me.
Thank you indeed. Mr Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the comments made by many. I mean, for those of us who've been fortunate enough at any council to be in a position of authority, the work level has increased enormously over that time, and I think support is something valuable. But I assume, bearing in mind the Lib Dems putting this forward, they put it forward at their national convention, made it a policy, because I've just had a quick trawl on the internet, and it's amazing how many Lib Dem run councils have got cabinet support members. So I assume at their conference they will be doing away with those. I also think with the second part, where we were talking about cabinet support, I think that is a dangerous area to go into. We have a head of paid service who is our chief executive. If any member wants to comment on the budget, what they should be commenting on is the establishment bill in any one area rather than different jobs, etc. It is then for the chief executive, quite rightly, as the head of our civil service, to work out how best to fulfil the duties and what those roles should be. So I actually think the second part is quite appalling, frankly, and goes to the route of the demarcation line that should exist between those of us that set strategy and those that work long and hard implementing that strategy for us and making the decision about the best personnel to do that and what their job title should be.
Thank you, Mr Richardson. Mr Philip.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just doing a little bit of backtracking just to support my colleague, Mr Merry. The Environment and Transport Committee Scrutiny Overview Committee is a cross-party, and I'm just double-checking, but the last public consultation was June last year. I'm with Mr Merry. I do not remember ever anything being proposed by anybody, whether it's this party or the opposition parties, to change our flood risk strategy. What I do know is, and my colleague over here, Amanda, we have, in my county division, in Amanda's division, we've had 3 unique events. We are working on them. I've met with many officers, I don't know about Amanda, but they were first-time floods, first event ever. It's not as simple as saying, we need more drainage. There's a lot of work got to be done to understand what happened and why it happened. And then, and it comes back to the comment about this is a strategy from the leader, we work out what needs to be done. So I'm sorry, we are in a run-up to a general election. It's a shame that nobody tables these things in the standard process of putting it into the scrutiny committees. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Mr Phillimore. I've had no more people. Oh, Mr Charlesworth. Terribly sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Glad you didn't miss me out. There seems to be a real sense of over-importance among some of my Conservative colleagues. We're elected as county councillors every 4 years. Some of us stop around for that period, some of us go on and do many years, like Mr Bill. The sense that cabinet members are now full-time professional politicians, I find ill-informed at best and distasteful. You're not. You're ordinary members of the public who've chosen to stand for office. You're in office at the will of the people. Simple as that. You refer to them as bag carriers. If you find that...
Charlesworth, I presume you're addressing me, not the cabinet members.
I beg your pardon. Through you, Chair. You're not professional politicians, Chair. And that perception has got to stop. It's a simple enough amendment. It's clear. I don't understand the cabinet system as well as many others. We don't have it at Oban Wigston, thank God. I beg your pardon. Chair? Thank you. I will be supporting the amendment. You know, in 2025 we're going to have county council elections, Chair, and we'll have a completely new set of people, and it may not be the administration we have at the moment. So they will be coming into it fresh. So the perception you have to be around and learn the trade is disingenuous, has been put forward by Mr Rushton and Mr Parton. Experience is everything, I take it at that. And people who come in may offer valuable experience in all sorts of areas. So the over-grandisement of themselves is disingenuous.
Thank you, Mr Charlesworth. Mr O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. Well, personally, I do find it offensive to call Maggie a bag carrier. I don't have no bags carried for me at all. I work on behalf of this council and the community of Leicestershire. Maggie does a fantastic job on flooding. She's taken over on the flooding side and goes to the meetings. She's also worked on the SAPCOT. She's worked on various areas, and she works with Tor and the rest of the team. I go to meetings, but I can't go to every single meeting with my portfolio. Maggie does a great job, and to be perfectly frank with you, yes, I could not do the job without Maggie helping me. It's a big portfolio, and basically, you know, I'm here, there and everywhere, and when there's meetings on flooding, I've got a meeting somewhere else. So Maggie will cover that, and I do take offence because, you know, our Cabinet Assist, I did it for a start, and I did flooding when I was a Cabinet Assist. They do a lot of work. They carry out a lot of work. I'm not saying I'm a professional politician. I'm a community advocate for my community. And while I sit here as a Cabinet member, you know, I'm a community advocate on that particular area. I not only look after my community, I like to look after the whole of Leicestershire as an elected member. So, to be perfectly frank with you, I just find it a little bit embarrassing that you would call Maggie my bag handler. I've got no bag handler at all. And if my wife was here, God bless her soul, she'd put that matter right as well. She never carried my bags.
Thank you, Ozzy. Mr Payne and then Mrs Richardson.
2 points from me, Mr Chairman. Firstly, I find it interesting that there's two separate Liberal Democrat motions here. Why on earth they couldn't have put one together? I can only assume that they were split in terms of their internal group as to where the money should come from to fund whatever they wanted to fund. But it would have been helpful, A, for a bit of foresight, but B, that maybe one motion was put forward. But secondly, I wasn't going to speak until Mr Charlesworth said something, and I find what he said quite insulting. It's not the case that the Cabinet members are full-time professional politicians. We all recognise at local government level we're not professional politicians. We don't create legislation. We are local politicians, and we do the best for the residents that we represent. In my case, I also work, and it's interesting that we were discussing as a group how we could diversify a couple of weeks ago and how we could attract more candidates. And I know firsthand there's a lot of people in my community that approach me who are interested in council business and what it's like being a local representative, but they unfortunately aren't in a financial position, or they perceive they're not in a financial position to put themselves forward. And what you're basically saying, whether it's a cabinet support member, a cabinet member, whoever you're targeting to take remuneration of, it's true that the Employment Act 1997 has in section 50 a provision for ensuring that people can put themselves forward for public duties. And it's true that an employer can't refute that, and they can allow reasonable time off in addition to their annual time off. But it's also true that an employer does not have to pay them for that time off, and many employers won't pay them for that time off. So if we want a more diversified council with younger people coming through the system to take over the roles that we've discharged, we need to actually bear that in mind and make ourselves attractive and actually support the idea of people coming through that might otherwise be able to afford to come through because they haven't got a pension or some other forms of income. And to put motions forward like this, I think is disrespectful to the future elected members of this Leicestershire County Council. Thank you.
Mr Payne. Mrs Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd just like to say that I'm here for my residents. I'm not here as a professional. but I do have professional qualifications and skills that help me with that job, and so do most of the cabinet members and the support. We're actually here, we take these jobs on and we take the responsibility on for driving the strategies within our departments and our portfolios and for the council. So I think it's important to recognise that. With my portfolio, and it's quite small compared to some of the others, I am virtually full-time with my meetings, etc. And I do have time fitting anything else in. Never mind my colleagues who work and have to try and do it around that as well. So I think in some respects there should be some respect for the people who are making these decisions and pushing the council on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Richardson. I've got no other speakers, so Mr Brecon, right to reply.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the motion, I will be voting against the motion. I think it's ill-informed. I think a few of the comments in the chamber today, again, words of choice, I think have been, bag carrier is not really a good word to use, but I understand the sort of motive behind it. But I certainly support our cabinet members that we have here. They do a great job, and they certainly support the cabinet members who's in post. It's a privilege to be appointed a cabinet member. And you certainly don't do the work on behalf of your division, you do it on behalf of this county of Leicestershire. So very proud of that. All I'd suggest to Mr Chilvers is perhaps if his party win the next election in 2025 and take control of this administration, then perhaps he will find out what it's like to become a cabinet member and the responsibilities that entails. So that is my words on that. I struggle with this motion. I mean, Mr Phillimore talked eloquently about the frustrations of not having put this through any of our scrutiny systems, and I think that is a failing of the two motions here again today. I did say it earlier, and they've confirmed that. On the last one, I mean, we've allocated 1.5 million to gully emptying in this next budget. We've allocated 80,000 to camera van, drainage repairs of 1.35 million, total of 2.9 million in revenue, and for capital we've allocated 1.1 million. We know that that's the total of just over 4 million that the leader spoke about earlier. We know we're going to get more Network North money, but we know we've put £100,000 of that into this budget, so we've got that, but we're expecting more. I think that the failing of this is you talk about we can do all this to borrow more money. Borrowing is really not the direction of this council and this administration. We've been fighting that, and we're trying to curtail growth and also our borrowing, and it really doesn't help this administration going forward. So I'm quite happy that I will be voting against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Brecon. Which brings us to the time to vote. This again will be a recorded vote, and my colleague Lauren here will therefore read out your names. Just like last time, you're either against the amendment for motion or for it.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Allen. Against. Mr Ashman. Against. Mr Bannister. Mr Barclay.
Against.
Mr Bedford. Against. Mr Bill. For. Mr Bolter. For. Mr Bray. For. Mr Brecon.
Against.
Mrs Broadley. Mr Champion. Against. Mr Chapman. Against. Mr Charlesworth. For. Mr Coxon. Dr Feltham. Against. Mr Frisbee.
Against.
Mrs Fryer. Mr Galton. Mr Gamble. Mr Gattaraya. Mr Gillard. Mr Grimley. Mrs Hack. Mr Haji Nicolaou. Mr Harrison. Mr Harrison Rushton. Mr Hills. Mr Hunt. Mrs Jordan. Mr King. Mr Lovegrove. Mr Merry. Mr Mear. Mr Morgan. Mr Mullaney. Mrs Newton. Mr O'Shea. Mr Orson. Mrs Page. Mr Payne. Mr Parton. Mr Pendleton. Mr Phillimore. Mr Poland. Mrs Posnett. Mrs Bradford. Mr Richardson? Mrs Richardson? Mr Rushton? Mrs Seaton? Mr Shepherd? Mr Smith? Mrs Taylor? Mrs A Wright? Mrs M Wright? It's the same as before, it's 39 against, so lost. So go back to the main motion.
That's lost, so we go back to the substantive, i.e. the original main motion. Any member who had not previously spoken on the original motion can still debate. Members who have only spoken on Amendment 1 or 2, but not both, may speak. Are anyone else wish to speak on the main motion? Mr Bray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I don't want to prolong the debate for too much longer. I think I've been here reflecting 15 years and I don't think I've missed a budget debate, and every single one of those debates has gone exactly the same way, that the administration has proposed and seconded it, and there's been a few good speeches on all sides, and we've put amendments some years and we're criticised for doing that, not put amendments other years, criticised for doing that. And we always vote against it, they always vote for it, and I'm sure exactly the same is going to happen today, and we could have saved ourselves 3 hours. But, but you know, we are a representative democracy, and it is healthy that people have their say. There are 3 specific points I think I just want to make in the general debate. First of all, I was a bit sad, really, how the tone of that debate on that last amendment went in terms of Cabinet support members. I think we've always, as a group, been very consistent in our approach that we don't support them. That is nothing against the individuals doing those jobs. It's just something that we've never supported. Incidentally, I will say to some of my friends opposite who haven't been here quite as long as he, that the term bag carrier was one that was first coined by a name who I don't think he's allowed to be spoken now, Mr Parsons. Some of you might remember him. He coined that phrase. It is disrespectful, and I think we should probably stop using it. But nevertheless, you know, the point is there. Another point that's come up today, and it's the first time we've heard this. We've heard a number of times back and forward about Sir Peter's stance on the government deal, and you know, the Labour group have said what they say, the Conservative group say what they say. But the first, we've heard Rutland brought into it today, and sort of as an attack on the Liberals. I will say I have spoken or exchanged messages with the leader of Rutland during the course of the debate today, and to be clear, a level 3 deal has never been on the table as far as Rutland is concerned since the election changed in May. So So the point that she is making quite clearly is for anybody to start saying that this is down to Rutland, the fact that we've not got a level 3 deal, is just rubbish, frankly. The other thing I think I found incredibly depressing today is the letter that Simon referred to right at the start of the debate, or before the debate, in the leader's statement, and only 2 MPs have signed it. And the line that, people on the payroll can't sign it. Now, we've had a tweet from Dr Evans confirming this as well. And I just say that I find it really depressing that the first duty of these people who we elect to speak up for us in Parliament is to stand up for their constituents and to stand up for these councils and the funding of our services in these councils. So to say that they are putting their own careers ahead of standing up for that, I think is depressing, frankly. Look, you know, we are where we are in this situation financially, and yes, of course, you know, I'm sure that the people opposite are doing the best to deal with the hand that they have been dealt. But here's a thing that they or anybody else can't really get around of. At the end of this budget, people will be paying more and they will be getting less. That is a fact. And another fact is that for 2 decades, the Conservatives have run the council here. For over a decade, they've been in charge nationally. There is nobody else that people can blame when they're getting their council tax bills and seeing their services cut. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bray. Looking round. No. I think this is now Mr. Brecon to sum up.
Seems like a long time ago we were talking about the MTFS.
Yeah.
We're here today because we have to set a balanced budget. That's the role of this administration and this council. First time this year we're actually using our reserves. That is even the fact that we've saved 262 million since 2010. We still have to use our reserves. If we weren't using reserves, I'd have been here today asking you for a 6.5% council tax increase, and that would have balanced the budget this year. No reserves needed. So if I was to ask you to approve a 10% council tax rise over the next 4 years of this term, that would mean that our £80 million gap that we have at the end of the 4-year term doesn't exist. But of course that isn't open to us. It would be very unpopular with the residents. So I go back to what I said in my sort of opening remarks, that as an administration we provided clear, decisive and economic leadership and making the most of what we have, maximising every penny and ensuring it's spent in the most effective way and spending it where it matters for the residents of Leicestershire. That is what this administration, certainly in the time I've been involved with it, has done, and it will continue to do. I mean, we provide 400 services daily. A question was asked about our budget. 85% of our budget is spent on social care. And out of those 400 services we do, we have to do the very best for those residents. As Nick said, we look after the vulnerable, and those residents deserve the very best. We don't want to be here in a position like Birmingham City yesterday announced they've got to sell £750 million of their assets. They've got to cut public services by £150 million for the next 2 years to try and balance their books. And they're looking to raise their council tax by 21%. That is not a position this authority is in, because we've been prudent and we've managed it well. We'll continue to do that. Our Section 151 officer is very much of the view that this is a budget that he's happy with. He's happy to sign it, and he's assessed it and he's looked at that. I think the only comment before I sit down is that a lot was mentioned about the net zero targets, but net zero, clearly in the recommendation we set out that in the light of the council's financial position, that's the reason we've moved those targets back. They are important to us, but yeah, we have to make decisions, and as I say, that's one of the decisions we've had to make, and that's the recommendation here. So as I say, Chair, happy to move and close marks.
Thank you, Mr. Breckin. So we now move to a recorded vote of the original, if you remember, which is now the substantive motion. So I'll ask Lauren to continue reading out your names.
Thank you, Chair. The last.
You're either for or against this time, the original motion.
Thank you. So, Mr. Allen, Mr. Ashman, Mr. Bannister, Mr. Barclay,
for,
Mr. Bedford, Mr. Bill, Mr. Bolter, Mr. Bray, Mr. Breckard, Mrs. Broadley, Mr. Champion, Mr. Chapman, Mr. Charlesworth, Mr. Coxon, Dr. Feltham,
for,
Mr. Frisbee,
For.
Mrs. Fryer, Mr. Galton, Mr. Gamble, Mr. Gattaraya, Mr. Gillard, Mr. Grimley, Mrs. Hack, sorry, Mr. Hadji Nicolaou, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Harrison Rushton, Mr. Hills, Mr. Hunt, Mrs. Jordan, Mr. King, Mr. Lovegrove, Mr. Merry, Mr. Mear, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Mullaney, Mrs. Newton, Mr. O'Shea, Mr. Orson, Mrs. Page, Mr. Payne, Mr. Parton, Mr. Pendleton, Mr. Phillimore, Mr. Poland, Mrs. Posnett, Mrs. Bradford, Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Richardson, Mr. Rushton, Mrs. Seaton, Mr. Shepherd, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Taylor, Mrs. A. Wright, Mrs. M. Wright. 39, 4, so it's carried.
Right. So the original substantive motion, therefore, is carried. Thank you. We're not having tea now. We've got 2 more items to go through, and I'm sure we can do that in about 20 minutes. Agenda item number 8 is report to the Corporate Governance Committee. Proposed changes to the contract procedure rules. Mr. Barclay to move.
Thank you, Chair.
I agree.
This is going to be short. So, annually, the contract procedure rules are required to be reviewed and updated in line with current legislation and in the light of experience. The necessary amendments are identified and outlined in Appendix A of the report. Corporate Governance Committee have already considered the amendments and are happy to recommend to full council that approval to the amendments is given. I propose that the proposed amendments to the contract procedure rules as outlined in Appendix A to the report to the Corporate Governance Committee be approved.
Thank you very much. Mr Richardson.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Thank you very much. Any speakers? Or can we move to a vote? Yep, so all in favour, please raise a hand. That was carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Right. Agenda item number 9, notice of motion, support for care experienced people. Mrs Taylor to move.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and I know it's been a long meeting, but I hope I can have attention of all members just while we discuss this important motion. So I'd firstly like to welcome our 2 key leavers, Jordan and Dan, that are here with Deepa in the chamber today. So they're here to support me as I support them in bringing this important motion to the chamber, and I hope that members from all sides support it. Also welcome Sophie with Paul over there from Leicestershire Cares, who've researched this subject and also presented their research to me, so I welcome them to the chamber. I'd also like to welcome Terry Galloway to the chamber, who has been the co-founder of Care Leavers Offers and been a Care Leaver champion and campaigner. So Terry has campaigned nationally for all councils to adopt care experience as a protected characteristic. This growing momentum nationally across local authorities and other organisations to make care leavers a protected characteristics within their policies to seek to redress the inequalities experienced by care experienced young people. To date, there are just over 80 councils that have done this, and we will be number 81 if we approve this today. So we're hoping to join that list along with 2 district councils in Leicestershire, but I will continue to campaign for all the districts within Leicestershire to adopt care leavers as a protected characteristics. So since becoming the lead member for children and families in July 2020, I've devoted my time to listening and speaking to as many young people as I can. I've learnt so much from them, how resilient they are, how they can communicate their needs, and how they know exactly what they want me to do to change things for the better, for the young people that they know will follow in their footsteps. That is why I've championed young people since taking up my role and why I bring this motion today. I want to explore every avenue to ensure that all the barriers that care experienced people face in achieving their ambitions are removed. Today, we are one step nearer to removing another barrier. I want every young person in care who is care experienced to be able to achieve all their ambitions. People who have interacted with the care system have often had the hardest start in life, so it's up to us all in positions of responsibility to ensure that nothing holds them back. As we are corporate parents, I ensure that this council upholds our 7 corporate parent principles of well-being, to act in the best interests and promote the physical and mental health and well-being of children and young people, voice, to encourage those young people to express their views to us, their wishes and their feelings, to make sure they're heard, to be aspirational, to promote high aspiration and seek to secure the best outcomes for those children and young people. Equality of opportunity, to help those children and young people gain access to and make the best use of services provided by the local authority and its partners. And relationships, for those children and young people to be safe and stable in the home lives, relationships and education in work. And most importantly, preparing for adulthood, to prepare those children and young people for adulthood and independent living. Many care experienced people face discrimination, stigma and prejudice daily, often finding it challenging to access support. Public perceptions of care experience can sometimes centre on the idea that children are damaged, which can lead to discrimination and assumptions being made. This stigma and discrimination can be explicit and often comes with assumptions about the likely characteristics of children and adults that have care experience. They can also be implicit and are evidenced in the way care experience is discussed in schools, in workplaces and in the media. At its worst, this can lead to care experienced children being refused employment, failing to succeed in education or facing unfair judgments about their ability to parent when they have children and families of their own. I was shocked to recently see an advert for a rental property that actually stated, "No care leavers." How must that feel for care experienced young people just wanting a home to call their own, a safe, warm place to be able to see that and to see that written down in black and white in front of them. Care experienced young people are one of the most vulnerable groups of people across our society. Care experienced young people will often encounter disproportionately negative outcomes relating to a range of factors, including education, employment, and their exposure to the criminal justice system. Most recently, it's been recognised that around 50% of the prison population aged under 21 have spent time in the care system. In 2018-19, only 13% of pupils who were continuously looked after for 12 months or more entered higher education, compared to 43% of other pupils. In 2019, the Department for Education showed by the age of 19 to 21-year-olds, 38% of care-experienced young people are not in education, employment or training, in comparison to 11.6% of all other young people. The impact for our young people of being in care relates to the trauma they may experience, and their experiences of being marginalised. This highlights the symptomatic difficulties care-experienced young people face by simply being part of their demographic. Young people feel written off as an individual and allow professionals to form assumptions and hinder opportunities for these young people without accepting them for their individual personalities and attributes. By recognising these disadvantages, systems can begin to understand the experiences of young people, therefore creating and implementing strategies to target these disadvantages. It's important to understand that all experiences are individual, and care-experienced young people's views differ on this. A key theme for me is the lack of understanding across society. Suppose all of society understands the specific experiences and needs of care-experienced young people. In that case, this would benefit all young people by creating a wider understanding, by tackling stereotypes, potentially creating more opportunities. Care-experienced young people have a limited support network and often struggle to discover opportunities that aid them in advancing from the struggles in their life. It's important for care-experienced young people to have a trusted support network purpose-built for them and their needs. Stability and a solid foundation for future success in their lives. Care-experienced young people are often susceptible to feelings of loneliness and vulnerability due to having a limited network to turn to for help. It's important for young people to feel supported in achieving their dreams and for this support to come from people that they have good relationships with and not just those people that are available for those young people. The independent review of children's social care by Joss McAllister published a final report and recommendations in May 2022 that included government should make care experience a protected characteristic, and that new legislation should be passed which broadens corporate parenting responsibilities across a wider set of public bodies and organisations. On protected characteristics for care experience, many care experienced people face discrimination, stigma and prejudice in their day-to-day lives. Public perception of care experience centre on the ideas that children are damaged, and this can lead to discrimination and assumptions being made. The independent review identified, after hearing testimony from care experienced people sharing the discrimination they have experienced, even from a very young age, it's clear that discrimination can be similar in nature to other groups that have a legally protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. Recognising care experience as a protected characteristics is a right approach for this council to ensure that those who are care experienced are fully supported. Also, not only are trying to support for care experienced individuals, but also integrates this support into established mechanisms that public bodies are already familiar with. This ensures that supporting care experienced individuals is not an add-on, but a fundamental aspect of policy development and decision-making. The approach guarantees that policies are developed with equity in mind, ensuring that care experienced individuals have the support and opportunities they need to strive. In conclusion, I am proposing that this council recognises that councils have a duty to put the needs of vulnerable people at the heart of decision-making through co-production and collaboration. This council would treat care experience as if they were a protected characteristics, so that future services and policies made and adopted by the council should be assessed through the equality impact assessments to determine the impact of changes on people with care experience along those who formerly share a protected characteristics. I hope the Chamber will support me today.
Thank you, Mrs Taylor. Mr Smith, your second.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Happy to second it, and I'll reserve right.
Yeah, thanks very much. Mr Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. The Labour Group, of course, will support this motion. It's excellently framed, and I thank Deborah Taylor very much for bringing it to the council. Many of us have either got corporate or personal concerns about this area, and it's one of the reasons why many of us are in politics, for these social reasons. And I'm glad we've got an audience this afternoon. I just also draw attention to the role models that exist in this area, and I'm thinking of Mo Farah, Lem Cisse and others. So thank you very much for bringing this through your chair, and we'll support it.
Thanks, Mr Hunt. Mr Bray.
Yes, Chairman, again, I'll be brief. I won't repeat what's been said, but the Liberal Democrat Group will also be backing this motion. I note the point in it about asking other Leicestershire districts or authorities to do that. I've spoken with officers at Hinkley Bosworth, and Hinkley Bosworth are already on the journey towards this, so again, their name could be added to the list as well. Hinkley Bosworth will be supporting it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Mr Bray. Mrs Newton.
Thank you very much. I would like to support this, and thank you very much, Deborah, for bringing it to the council. There is another element of not just carers, there's also young carers. I mean, my research area at university was for young carers. These are young people who are caring for adults, and quite often they don't get the support they need. They're lacking in education. They have no time really for any entertainment, anything outside the home. And when we're looking at carers, let's not forget those young people who are going home after a day at school, sometimes quite often missing out on education and having to care for families because there's nobody there to care for them. I've got a passion for young carers, so I'd like them to be considered as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Newton. Mrs Ra.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I assure people that when they come of adult age, that the adult department at county will also be there to support you. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, as well as Deborah's department. We don't just say, that's it, you're now an adult, 18 or whatever. We are there to support you.
Thanks, Mrs Radford. Mrs Posnett.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that as a recent member of the Children in Care Committee, as part of another role I've got at county, it's not an evening meeting I'd dread attending and thinking, oh, what could I be doing tonight? It's a meeting I look forward to going to because you meet some of these young people in care, and it's really enlightening to listen to them about what they want to do, how they think we could improve perhaps some of the acronyms that we use and make them more understandable to them. And this is a motion that should be supported. We owe it to our young people to protect them and look after them.
Thank you, Mrs Posnett. Mr Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Could I thank Deborah for bringing this to the council? I fully support this. It's an excellent motion. Could I just ask if Deborah, the County Council produced an excellent video produced with care leavers themselves. Could I ask through Deborah that perhaps this could be passed on to every member and those district councils considering passing the motion? Because I think it's such a powerful video, it deserves a wide audience.
Thank you, Mr Richardson. Mr Meyer.
Cheers, thank you, Mr Chairman. I don't want to prolong the meeting anymore, but myself and Councillor Taylor, Deborah Taylor, we share, we're two inactors, we share responsibilities at another council. More than welcome to speak to you about this and maybe move things forward in Charnwood. But also, there's I've been speaking to officers, and there's other things that we might put in, like guaranteed interviews, job interviews, apprenticeships, and that kind of thing that may help and evolve this idea. But it's an excellent idea, and I'm happy to support.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No others, so I think it's Mr Smith you reserved a remark.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So I'm delighted to support this motion for Leicestershire County Council to recognise lived care experience as a protected characteristic. This initiative has been championed and led by our care leavers, and as a corporate parents, I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming Jordan and Dan today into the chamber as representatives of our extended care leavers family. The recent independent review of children's social care emphasised the critical importance of acknowledging care experienced young people as one of the most vulnerable demographics in our society. As mentioned, often these young people face disproportionate challenges in various aspects of their lives, including employment, education and involvement in the criminal justice system. By formally recognising care experience as a protected characteristic, this authority will join a broader movement among local authorities to elevate their responsibilities as corporate parents to a higher standard, recognising that this authority has a duty to put the needs of disadvantaged young people at the heart of decision making through co-production and collaboration. This action will not only raise awareness, but it will also create more opportunities for care experienced youth, fostering an environment with reduced stigma and discrimination directed against them. And I urge all members of the Council to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Smith. So, Mrs Taylor, you have...
Thank you. I won't prolong what's been a long day, but I think after the afternoon we've had this afternoon, I think this is a nice note to end on today. So I thank all members for their comments and for them saying that they will support that. I'm sure our care leavers in the room today would also appreciate the warm comments that you've made about them. So I really appreciate them being here today to listen to this, and I appreciate Terry being here as well to make us the 81st council to do this, and I look forward to members that are leaders of districts here saying that they'll work with me to make sure we spread this across Leicestershire. So I thank all members for their contributions and comments today. Thank you.
So we now take a vote on the motion. All in favour? Yep, thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you very much.